I was reviewing quarterly reports when Mom's call shattered my concentration. "We're traveling tomorrow. Your beach house and your car have already been sold." My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips. "I understand," I managed calmly, "but you forgot something." Her voice sharpened with irritation. "What do you mean?" I couldn't help the laugh that escaped. She'd just sold my college roommate Sarah's investment property, thinking it was mine. The real twist: I'd been documenting her financial fraud for months. The morning sunlight streaming through my office window seemed to mock the darkness I'd been uncovering for weeks. As I set down my phone, my hands remained surprisingly steady. 5 years had passed since that devastating afternoon when my father collapsed in his study, his heart giving out at just 58 years old. The grief had nearly consumed me then, but what followed proved even more challenging to navigate. My name is Kara, and at 32, I'd built a successful career as a forensic accountant. It's funny how life prepares you for moments you never see coming. All those years studying financial crimes, tracking money trails, and uncovering deception had unknowingly been preparing me for the biggest case of my life, one that would tear apart everything I thought I knew about my own family. When Dad died, he left behind more than just memories. His estate included a stunning beach house in Malibu, a property he'd purchased as an investment 15 years ago. The house meant everything to me, not for its monetary value, but because Dad and I had spent countless weekends there walking along the shore and talking about life. He'd always said it would be mine someday, a place where I could find peace whenever the world became too much. 3 months after the funeral, Mom had approached me with what seemed like a reasonable request. Grace Matthews was still beautiful at 55, with carefully styled blonde hair and an ability to cry on command that I wouldn't fully appreciate until much later. She'd sat across from me at my kitchen table, tissues in hand, explaining how the estate taxes were overwhelming her. "Shh, sweetheart, if we don't do something smart, the government will take half of everything your father worked for," she'd said, her green eyes wide with concern. "My financial advisor suggested we temporarily transfer the beach house into my name. It's just paperwork, Kara. You know I'd never do anything to hurt you." I'd been drowning in my own grief, barely able to function at work, let alone think clearly about complex financial decisions. Mom had always handled the family finances anyway. Dad used to joke that she could squeeze a nickel until it screamed. So I'd signed the papers she presented, trusting her completely. After all, she was my mother. What kind of person suspects their own mother of deception while planning their father's memorial service? The months that followed blurred together in a haze of grief counseling and long work hours. I threw myself into my job at Preston Financial Consulting, finding solace in the clean logic of numbers and regulations. My specialty was investigating corporate embezzlement, and I developed a reputation for finding discrepancies others missed. Little did I know those same skills would soon be turned toward my own family. Everything changed 6 months ago when I decided to review Dad's estate planning documents for tax purposes. I'd been organizing my own finances and wanted to understand the full picture of my inheritance. That's when I noticed the first red flag: a series of property transfers that didn't match what Mom had told me. The beach house wasn't the only asset that had been moved into her name. Dad's investment portfolio, several valuable paintings, and even his vintage Mercedes had all been transferred using powers of attorney I didn't remember signing. My forensic instincts kicked in immediately. I started digging deeper, pulling records and tracing transactions. What I found made my blood run cold. Over the past 2 years, Mom had been systematically liquidating assets and moving money through a complex web of accounts. The transfers were clever, designed to look like legitimate investment moves, but I recognized the pattern. I'd seen it dozens of times in my corporate cases. Someone was preparing to disappear with a lot of money. The most shocking discovery came when I investigated the beneficiary of these transfers. The money wasn't just moving through Mom's accounts, it was ending up in the hands of someone named Derek Callahan, A quick investigation revealed he was Mom's financial advisor, though his credentials were as fake as his concern for our family's well-being. Public records showed he'd appeared in Mom's life just 8 months after Dad's death, and their relationship was far more than professional. I'd spent the last 3 months quietly building my case, documenting every transaction, every forged signature, every lie. My training taught me to be methodical, to gather evidence before making accusations. But I'd also learned something else. Criminals often accelerate their plans when they sense danger. Mom's phone call this morning confirmed my worst fears. She was making her final move. What she didn't know was that I'd anticipated this moment. The beach house she thought she'd sold, I'd secretly transferred the deed to my college roommate Sarah's investment LLC 6 weeks ago using a loophole in the original transfer documents. Mom had been so focused on her grand scheme that she'd never bothered to check the most recent property records. She'd just sold a house she didn't own to a buyer who didn't exist. As I sat in my office staring at the phone, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. The mother I'd loved, the woman who'd sung me lullabies and bandaged my scraped knees, had been planning to rob me blind and disappear with her con artist boyfriend. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated her daughter. I pulled up the encrypted files on my computer, reviewing the evidence I'd compiled: bank statements forged, documents, photographs of Mom and Derek at various properties they'd been scoping out in Costa Rica. My personal favorite was the email thread I'd recovered where they discussed their plans in detail, believing they were safe behind Derek's supposedly secure server. They even had pet names for each other. She called him Captain, and he called her Treasure. The irony wasn't lost on me. Tomorrow, they thought they'd be flying off into the sunset with my inheritance. Instead, they'd be walking into a carefully orchestrated trap involving the FBI, the IRS, and several other agencies I'd been cooperating with for weeks. The buyer, Mom, had sold the house to Special Agent Patricia Thompson, who'd been building a case against Derek for interstate fraud. The travel plans they'd made, every airline had been alerted, and their passports had been flagged. But the real twist, the one that would shock Mom to her core, was that I discovered something even darker than financial fraud. Hidden in Derek's past was a pattern of elderly victims, women who died under mysterious circumstances after changing their wills. And buried in Mom's search history were queries about undetectable poisons and inheritance law. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about justice for crimes that went far deeper than theft. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Thompson. "Everything is in place. Are you ready?" I typed back, more than ready. Tomorrow would bring tears, accusations, and probably some dramatic attempts at manipulation. Mom would play the victim, Derek would try to run, and I'd have to face the reality that my family was built on lies. But tonight, sitting in my office with the truth laid out before me, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Dad's death power over my own destiny. The quarterly reports I'd been reviewing seemed trivial now. In 24 hours, I'd be closing the biggest case of my life. The only difference was that this time, the criminal wasn't some faceless corporation. This time, it was the woman who'd given me life and then tried to steal it away. Sleep had eluded me completely after Mom's call. By 3 a.m, I'd given up pretending and made my way to the home office. I'd converted into what my friends jokingly called the war room. Every wall was covered with timelines, financial documents, and photographs connected by colored string like something out of a detective movie. At the center of it all was Derek Callahan's smiling face, a photo I'd pulled from one of his many fraudulent business websites. Derek was handsome in that calculated way con artists often are. At 48, he maintained himself meticulously, perfectly styled salt and pepper hair, expensive dental work, and a wardrobe designed to project success. In every photo, he positioned himself to display his Rolex, his gold pinky ring, or the keys to whatever luxury car he was driving that month. The image was crafted to attract a specific type of victim, wealthy widows looking for a second chance at love. What my investigation had uncovered about Derek made my skin crawl. Behind the charming smile and practiced compliments was a predator who'd spent 20 years perfecting his craft. I'd found traces of at least 3 previous wives, all wealthy, all mysteriously deceased within 2 years of marriage. The deaths were spread across different states: a drowning in Florida, a car accident in Arizona, a fall downstairs in Colorado. Each time Derek had walked away with a substantial inheritance before disappearing and reinventing himself in a new city. The pattern was always the same. He'd appear in the life of a grieving widow within a year of her husband's death, presenting himself as a successful financial advisor or investment consultant. He'd offer to help manage the complex estate, slowly gaining trust while romance bloomed. Within months, assets would start moving, always with logical explanations about tax benefits or investment opportunities. By the time the victim realized what was happening, if they ever did, it was too late. But Derek had made a crucial error with Mom. He'd chosen a target whose daughter was a forensic accountant with connections in law enforcement and a stubborn streak inherited from her father. I'd first become suspicious when I'd noticed Mom's sudden interest in international banking and offshore accounts, topics she'd never cared about before Derek's arrival. My investigation had started simply enough. A basic background check on Derek Callahan turned up nothing because that wasn't his real name. The social security number he'd been using belonged to a child who died in 1976. His financial advisor credentials were forged, his business address was a virtual office, and his references all led to disconnected phone numbers. Digging deeper, I discovered his real identity: Dennis James Holbrook, a man with warrants in 3 states, and a history that read like a crime novel. The FBI had been tracking him for years, but could never quite gather enough evidence for a conviction. He was smart, careful, and always managed to make the deaths look accidental, until now. My phone vibrated, interrupting my review of Derek's files. The name on the screen made my stomach drop. Ryan, my younger brother. At 28, Ryan had always been the baby of the family, coddled by Mom and protected from life's harsher realities. We'd grown distant since Dad's death, and his text at this hour couldn't mean anything good. "Need to talk. Can I come over?" I stared at the message, weighing my options. Ryan had been acting strangely for months, avoiding family dinners, changing the subject whenever I mentioned Mom's new boyfriend, fidgeting nervously whenever Derek's name came up. My investigator's instincts had noted his behavior, but I had been too focused on Mom and Derek to dig deeper. "Doors open," I replied. 20 minutes later, Ryan stood in my doorway looking like he'd aged 5 years in the past few months. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, his designer clothes wrinkled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. He took one look at my war room and slumped against the wall. "You know," he said simply. I studied my brother carefully. "The question is, what do you know?" Ryan collapsed into a chair, running his hands through his dark hair so, like Dad's, it made my heart ache. "I'm in trouble, Kara. Real trouble." Start from the beginning," I said, activating the recording app on my phone without him noticing. "Derek approached me 6 months ago." Ryan began, his voice barely above a whisper. "He knew things about my gambling debts, about the money I'd borrowed from the company. He said he could make it all go away if I just kept quiet about his relationship with Mom." My mind raced, processing this new information. "How much do you owe?" 40,000, maybe more." Ryan couldn't meet my eyes. "I got in deep with some bad people, Kara. I was desperate." "So Derek paid your debts?" "No." Ryan laughed bitterly. "He gave me enough to keep the wolves at bay, but he's been holding the rest over my head. Every time I think about coming clean, he reminds me what will happen if I don't cooperate." "What else does he have on you?" Ryan's face crumbled. "Photos from the company Christmas party, me and Jennifer. Jennifer, our CEO's wife." I closed my eyes, understanding flooding through me. "You're having an affair with Marcus Coleman's wife." "Had. It's over now, but Derek has pictures, videos," he said. If I didn't help convince you that Mom was happy, that everything was fine, he'd send everything to Marcus. I'd lose my job, my reputation, everything. The pieces were falling into place. Ryan's sudden support of Mom's relationship, his insistence that I was being paranoid about Derek, his refusal to look at the evidence I'd tried to show him, it had all been orchestrated. There's more, Ryan continued. Derek's been using me to get information about your investigation. Every time you told me something, I had to report back to him. I'm so sorry, Kara. I wanted to tell you, but you were scared? I finished. Ryan listened to me carefully. What has Derek told you about their plans? They're leaving tomorrow, flying to Costa Rica on a private jet Derek chartered. He showed me the flight plan to prove he'd really leave if I cooperated. But Kara, there's something else. Something worse. I leaned forward. Tell me. I overheard them talking last week. Mom doesn't know I was listening. Derek was explaining why they had to move fast. He said you were getting too close, that you'd figured out too much. And Mom? Ryan's voice broke. Mom said maybe they should have started with you instead of Dad. The room spun for a moment. I'd suspected Mom might have been involved in Dad's death, but hearing confirmation from Ryan hit differently. She admitted to killing Dad. Not in those words, but the implication was clear. Derek said something about how the heart medication had worked perfectly, and Mom laughed. She actually laughed about our father's death. Rage built inside me, but I forced it down. There would be time for emotions later. Right now, I needed information. What else have you heard? They're planning to sell everything and disappear. The beach house was just the start. Mom's been slowly poisoning Grandma Eleanor to get access to her accounts. That's why she's been so confused lately. It's not dementia, it's whatever Mom's been putting in her tea during their weekly visits. I grabbed my phone ready to call Agent Thompson immediately, but Ryan caught my hand. There's one more thing, Rosie, he said. Derek knows you've been investigating him. He has someone on the inside feeding him information. He mentioned a name, Patterson. Said Patterson would make sure you were handled if you became too much of a problem. Detective Patterson. I'd been sharing information with him for weeks, thinking he was helping build the case. Another piece of Derek's web revealed itself. Ryan, I need you to listen very carefully. I said, my mind already formulating a plan. You're going to help me stop them, but first we need to get you somewhere safe. Derek's previous victims, the ones who knew too much, they didn't fare well. I mean, we have less than 24 hours to spring a trap on two killers who know we're coming. But I have something they don't expect, proof of their crimes, and a brother willing to make things right. Ryan straightened in his chair, something of Dad's determination flickering in his eyes. What do you need me to do? First, we're going to document everything you just told me. Then you're going to play along with Derek's plan while wearing a wire. Can you do that? After what they did to Dad, after what they're doing to Grandma, Ryan's jaw set in a way I recognized. I can do whatever it takes. As dawn broke outside my window, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I felt the tide turning. Derek thought he had everyone under control. Mom would love, Ryan would blackmail me with isolation. But predators often make one fatal mistake. They underestimate the power of family bonds, even fractured ones. One more question, I said as Ryan prepared to leave. The storage unit where Derek wanted to meet, did he mention why? Ryan nodded grimly. He said that's where they're keeping the real evidence. Documents that could put you away for embezzlement if the authorities found them. Forged papers with your signature, fake accounts in your name. He called it their insurance policy. Insurance policy? I almost smiled. Derek thought he was playing chess while everyone else played checkers. What he didn't realize was that I'd been playing a different game entirely, one where every move he made only tightened the noose around his own neck. Go home, I told Ryan. Act normal. When Derek contacts you, agree to everything. We'll be ready. As my brother left, I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts, stopping at a number labeled Sarah, Beach House. Time to let my old roommate know her investment property was about to play a starring role in taking down a killer. The war room around me suddenly felt less like a battlefield and more like a command center. In 18 hours, Derek and Mom would make their move. They thought they were escaping to freedom. Instead, they'd be walking into a carefully orchestrated symphony of justice. I looked at Dad's photo on my desk, the one where he was laughing at something I'd said during our last beach trip together. "We're really doing this, Dad," I whispered. "We're going to stop them." Outside, the city was waking up unaware of the drama about to unfold. But in my war room, surrounded by evidence and powered by determination, I was ready for battle. Derek Callahan or Dennis Holbrook or whoever he really was had chosen the wrong family to destroy. By tomorrow night, he'd understand just how wrong he'd been. Aunt Margaret's house had always been neutral territory in our family, a Victorian-era home in Pasadena that smelled of lavender and old books. At 72, Margaret was Dad's older sister and the unofficial keeper of family history. I'd called her at 6 that morning, explaining just enough to convey urgency without revealing the full scope of the disaster unfolding around us. "Family meeting, 2 o'clock. Everyone needs to be there," I'd said, including Grace. Margaret's tone had been carefully neutral, but I caught the underlying tension. She'd never fully warmed to my mother, always maintaining a polite distance that I now understood might have been instinctive wisdom. Especially Grace. Now sitting in Margaret's parlor, surrounded by family photos spanning 3 generations, I watched the players assemble for what would either be my finest moment or my most spectacular failure. The FBI agents were in position outside. Patterson had been quietly arrested that morning, and every word spoken in this room would be recorded by the device hidden in my purse. Ryan arrived, first looking pale but determined. He caught my eye and nodded slightly. Derek had contacted him as expected, and the meeting at the storage unit was set for tonight. Next came our cousins, Jennifer and Paul, both successful lawyers who'd driven down from San Francisco at my urgent request. They knew something significant was happening, but not the details. Then came Grandma Eleanor, helped by her longtime caregiver, Nancy. At 85, Eleanor had been the matriarch of our family since Grandpa passed 10 years ago. For the past 6 months, everyone had noticed her increasing confusion and memory lapses. Now knowing about Mom's poisoning scheme, I watched her carefully. Her movements were slower than they should be, her eyes occasionally unfocused, but there was something else, a sharpness that flickered when she thought no one was looking. Kara, dear," Eleanor said as Nancy helped her into her favorite armchair. "Such drama calling us all together like this reminds me of those mystery novels I used to read." I squeezed her hand gently, noting how thin her skin had become. "Sometimes real life is stranger than fiction, Grandma." The doorbell rang, and my stomach clenched. Margaret answered, and I heard Mom's voice high and artificially bright, followed by a deeper masculine tone that made my skin crawl. They entered together, a picture of couples bliss that might have fooled anyone who didn't know better. Mom had dressed for the occasion in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, likely purchased with my father's money. Her hair was freshly styled, her makeup perfect, her smile practiced. But I noticed the tight grip she maintained on her designer purse and the way her eyes quickly scanned the room, assessing threats. Derek was in full performance mode, shaking hands and flashing his practiced smile. He wore a navy blazer with gold buttons projecting an image of sophisticated wealth. His hair was slicked back, and that ostentatious pinky ring caught the light as he moved. When he reached me, he held out his hand. Kara, your mother tells me you've organized quite the gathering. How wonderful to see the family coming together." I shook his hand briefly, noting the slight dampness of his palm. "Derek, thank you for coming." "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," he said with a wink that made me want to wash my hand immediately. Once everyone was seated, I stood in the center of the room, feeling the weight of 7 pairs of eyes on me. This was it, the moment I'd been preparing for during months of sleepless nights and careful investigation. Thank you all for coming. I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. I know this is unusual, but I have some information that affects our entire family. Mom laughed, the sound tinkling like broken glass. Oh, Kara, always so dramatic. Is this about the beach house? I told you the sale is for the good of the family. The tax benefits alone. The beach house that sold this morning wasn't yours to sell. I interrupted, watching her face carefully. You sold Sarah Martinez's investment property by mistake. You never owned my beach house because I transferred it 6 weeks ago. The color drained from Mom's face. Derek's smile never wavered, but his eyes hardened. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. No misunderstanding. I continued, pulling out a folder of documents, just like there's no misunderstanding about the systematic theft of my inheritance, the forged signatures, or the money transfers to accounts in Costa Rica. Kara, Mom's voice rose sharply. How dare you make such accusations? I'm your mother. Yes, I agreed. My mother who put poison in Dad's heart medication. The room erupted. Jennifer gasped. Paul shot to his feet, and Margaret clutched her chest. But I kept my eyes on Mom and Derek, watching their reactions. Mom's face cycled through shock, indignation, and finally cold calculation. Derek's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something dark underneath. You're clearly having some kind of breakdown, Mom said, her voice dripping with false concern. Derek, darling, I think we should call Dr. Hoffman. Kara's been under so much stress lately. Dr. Hoffman lost his license 3 years ago, I said calmly. But you already knew that when you had him create those fake therapy records suggesting I'm mentally unstable. The ones you plan to use for the conservatorship. Derek stood, placing a protective arm around Mom. This is harassment. Grace, we should leave. Your daughter obviously needs help. Sit down, Dennis, I said, using his real name and watching him freeze. Or would you prefer I call you Douglas Hartman or Daniel Fitzgerald? I have documentation for all your identities. The silence that followed was deafening. Derek slowly sank back into his chair, his face now completely devoid of its usual charm. Mom looked at him with confusion that might have been genuine. Derek, what is she talking about? Your boyfriend is a serial killer who specializes in wealthy widows, I said, spreading photos across the coffee table. Patricia Holbrook drowned in 2019. Maria Fitzgerald car accident in 2021. Susan Hartman fell downstairs in 2023. All married to Derek under different names, all dead within 2 years. All left him everything. Mom shook her head violently. No, you're lying. You're trying to ruin my happiness because you can't stand seeing me move on from your father. I have the death certificates. I continued relentlessly. The marriage licenses, the inheritance documents. The FBI has been building this case for years. FBI. Derek's voice had lost all its warmth. You stupid little... Be careful, I warned. Every word you say is being recorded. Agent Thompson is particularly interested in your conversation with Mom last week, the one where you discussed how the heart medication worked so well on Dad. Mom went completely white. Ryan chose that moment to speak up. It's true, he said, his voice shaking but determined. I heard you, Mom. You laughed about killing Dad. You and Derek planned the whole thing. Ryan, Mom turned on him, her perfectly composed facade finally cracking. He's lying. Derek, tell them he's lying. But Derek was already calculating, his eyes darting between the windows and doors, measuring distances and obstacles. He didn't notice Eleanor slowly rising from her chair until she spoke. I've heard quite enough, Eleanor said, and her voice was suddenly crystal clear, lacking any trace of confusion. She pulled off the gray wig she'd been wearing, revealing her own silver hair neatly pinned beneath. I must say, Grace, you're not as clever as you think with your little tea time medications. The room went silent again, everyone staring at Eleanor in shock. She stood straighter than she had in months, her eyes sharp and focused. You thought I was too senile to notice the bitter taste in my tea. Eleanor continued walking steadily to the coffee table. Or too far gone to see you switching my medication bottles. I've been playing along for 3 months, documenting everything. She reached into her large purse and pulled out a small recorder. Every visit, every conversation, every confession you whispered when you thought I was too addled to understand, including the charming discussion about which funeral home would give you the best price for my eventual services. Derek lunged for the recorder, but Paul, 6'3" and still built like the college linebacker he'd once been, stepped smoothly into his path. I don't think so, Paul said quietly. You don't understand, Derek said desperately. She came to me. Grace approached me first. She'd heard about my previous situations. She wanted to learn. Mom's scream of rage was primal. She launched herself at Derek Nails extended, and it took both Ryan and Jennifer to hold her back. You bastard! We had a deal! You swore you'd never… Grace Matthews, a voice called from the doorway. Agent Thompson entered, flanked by 2 other FBI agents. Derek Callahan, or should I say, Dennis Holbrook, you're both under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder fraud, elder abuse, and about 15 other charges we'll sort out downtown. The next few minutes were chaos. Mom alternated between sobbing hysterically and shrieking about lawyers. Derek went silent, his face set in cold calculation as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Family members pressed against the walls, watching in horrified fascination as their relatives were arrested for murder. But through it all, I kept my eyes on Eleanor, who sat calmly sipping tea that Nancy had freshly prepared tea, without any mysterious additions. You knew all along, I said quietly. Eleanor smiled, and for a moment I saw my father in her expression. I suspected Grace from the beginning, dear. A mother knows when her son is truly happy, and your father never was not entirely. When I started feeling ill after her visits, I contacted a private investigator. Imagine my surprise when he discovered I wasn't her first victim. Why didn't you tell me? Because you needed to discover it yourself. You needed to build the case properly, legally. And besides, her eyes twinkled with mischief, I quite enjoyed the performance. Did you know Grace actually practiced her inheritance spending speeches when she thought I was napping such elaborate plans for my money? As the FBI agents led Mom and Derek away, Mom turned back one last time. Her perfect makeup was smeared, her cream suit wrinkled, but her eyes burned with fury. You've ruined everything, she hissed at me. Everything I gave birth to you, raised you, and this is how you repay me. You killed my father, I replied simply. You tried to kill my grandmother. You planned to steal everything and leave us with nothing. The only thing I've ruined is your plan to get away with it. The door closed behind them, and suddenly the house felt impossibly quiet. Family members began to move, to breathe, to process what they'd witnessed. Margaret bustled to the kitchen to make tea. Real tea, Eleanor noted with dark humor. Jennifer and Paul began asking questions about the legal implications. Ryan sat with his head in his hands, shoulders shaking. I walked to the window and watched the FBI vehicles pull away, red and blue lights fading into the distance. My mother, the woman who'd sung me lullabies and made me soup when I was sick, was a murderer. The knowledge sat heavy in my chest, a weight I'd carry forever. Eleanor appeared beside me, no longer playing the role of confused elderly woman. Her hand was warm and steady on my shoulder. You did the right thing, Kara, she said softly. Your father would be proud. Would he? I asked, suddenly exhausted. I just destroyed our family. No, dear, Eleanor corrected gently. Grace destroyed our family when she poisoned your father. You saved what was left of it. There's a difference. As the afternoon sun slanted through Margaret's lace curtains, casting patterns on the floor that looked almost like bars, I realized Eleanor was right. The family meeting I'd orchestrated hadn't destroyed anything, it had revealed what was already broken. And sometimes revelation is the first step toward real healing. But first, there was Ryan's meeting with Derek's associates to handle a trial to prepare for, and a grandmother to nurse back to full health. The war might be won, but the battles were far from over. The courtroom smelled of old wood and nervous sweat, a combination that had probably permeated these walls since the building's construction in 1923. I sat in the gallery's second row, my navy suit chosen specifically to project competence and credibility. Beside me, Ryan fidgeted, with his tie still uncomfortable with the wire he had worn to yesterday's storage unit, meeting a meeting that had yielded evidence beyond our wildest expectations. 3 weeks had passed since the family meeting, 3 weeks of depositions, evidence reviews, and media attention that made leaving my apartment feel like running a gauntlet. The story of a daughter uncovering her mother's murder plot had captured public imagination, turning our family tragedy into tabloid entertainment. I'd stopped reading the headlines after Black Widow and her boy toy-face Justice appeared on page 1. All rise, the bailiff announced. The Honorable Judge Patricia Weinstein presiding. Judge Weinstein entered with the bearing of someone who'd seen too much human cruelty to be surprised by anything. At 68, she was known for her no-nonsense approach and intolerance for courtroom theatrics, which was unfortunate for Mom's defense team, who seemed to specialize in exactly that. Mom entered in an orange jumpsuit that clashed horribly with her skin tone. They denied her bail, citing flight risk and the severity of the charges. Her usually perfect hair hung limp, and without her armor of designer clothes and expensive makeup, she looked older, smaller, almost pitiable. Almost. Derek followed, somehow managing to project arrogance even in custody. His attorney, Marcus Sterling, was known for getting guilty clients reduced sentences through technicalities and charm. Sterling's $2,000 suit and silver tongue had freed more criminals than I cared to count. We're here for the preliminary hearing in the matter of State versus Grace Matthews and Dennis Holbrook, also known as Derek Callahan, Judge Weinstein announced. Are all parties present? The prosecutors, led by Assistant District Attorney Monica Chen, confirmed their presence. Mom's lawyer, William Bradshaw, stood with theatrical flair. Present your honor, and ready to demonstrate this travesty of justice perpetrated against my client. Save it for your opening statement, Mr. Bradshaw, Judge Weinstein said dryly. The first hour passed in a blur of procedural matters and evidence authentication. Then came the moment I'd been dreading, Mom's attempt to paint herself as Derek's victim. Bradshaw presented his narrative with practiced emotion, describing a grieving widow manipulated by a cunning predator, so confused by love and loss that she couldn't see the danger until it was too late. My client was suffering from complicated grief, Bradshaw intoned. Mr. Holbrook identified her vulnerability and exploited it systematically. Any actions she may have taken were under his coercion and manipulation. I wanted to scream. The woman who'd cold-bloodedly poisoned my father was being portrayed as a helpless victim. Beside me, Ryan's hands clenched into fists. But Ada Chen remained calm, occasionally making notes, letting Bradshaw spin his tale. Then came Derek's defense. Sterling painted his client as a misunderstood financial advisor whose only crime was falling in love with the wrong woman. The previous deaths, tragic coincidences, the forged documents Grace's doing, the poison in Dad's medication. He knew nothing about it. Your Honor, Sterling said smoothly, my client's only mistake was trusting a woman who evidence will show has a history of manipulation dating back decades. That caught my attention. Sterling produced documents I'd never seen, records from Mom's first marriage, before Dad, a brief union that ended when her husband died in a boating accident. The insurance payout had been substantial. My stomach turned as Sterling outlined a pattern I'd missed in my own investigation. Judge Weinstein listened impassively, occasionally asking for clarification. Then she turned to Ada Chen. Does the prosecution have anything to add at this time? Chen stood slowly, a small smile playing at her lips. Your Honor, we have new evidence that came to light yesterday evening. With the court's permission, I'd like to call a witness who can speak to the defendant's state of mind and intentions. Objection! Both defense attorneys shouted simultaneously. On what grounds? Judge Weinstein asked. We haven't been notified of this witness, Bradshaw sputtered. Because we just located him last night, Chen replied smoothly. This witness has direct knowledge of the conspiracy and can provide crucial context. Judge Weinstein considered. I'll allow it, but keep it brief. The courtroom doors opened and collective gasps echoed through the gallery. Walking up the aisle was someone I recognized from Derek's files, but never expected to see in person, Robert Thompson, looking nothing like the FBI agent who'd arrested Mom and Derek. State your name for the record, Chen instructed once he was sworn in. Robert Thompson is my legal name, but for the past 8 months, Grace Matthews and Derek Callahan knew me as Marcus Fitzgerald. The courtroom erupted. Mom shot to her feet, screaming incoherently before the bailiffs restrained her. Derek's mask finally cracked completely, his face contorting with rage. Both defense attorneys objected loudly, but Judge Weinstein banged her gavel for order. Explain yourself, Mr. Thompson, the judge ordered once quiet was restored. Thompson, who I now realized was the buyer of the beach house, adjusted his tie. I'm an undercover FBI agent specializing in long-term fraud investigations. 8 months ago, we learned Derek Callahan was operating in the Los Angeles area. I was inserted into his sphere as a potential investor interested in his bogus investment schemes. And did you interact with both defendants? Chen asked. Extensively. Derek brought me into what he called his inner circle 3 months ago. I attended planning meetings where both defendants discussed their scheme in detail. I have recordings. Objection, Sterling roared. Entrapment, violation of attorney-client privilege, fruit of the poisonous tree. Your client wasn't speaking to an attorney, Judge Weinstein noted. He was speaking to someone he believed was a co-conspirator. Continue, Mr. Thompson. Thompson produced a small device. With the court's permission, I'd like to play a recording from 6 weeks ago. This was taken at the defendant Grace Matthews' home during what they called a strategy session. The courtroom fell silent as the recording began. First came Derek's voice, clear and cold. The old lady's taking too long to die. We need to increase the dosage. Then Mom, unmistakably Mom, despite her current claims of innocence. I'm already giving her double what you suggested. Any more and someone might notice. Then we moved to Plan B, Derek continued. A fall down the stairs. Accidents happen to confused elderly women all the time. Not yet, Mom's recorded voice said calculatingly. I need her to change the will first. Besides, Kara's getting suspicious. Maybe we should deal with her before Eleanor. Your daughter's smart, Derek admitted on the recording. But she trusts you. Use that. Get her to come for dinner, something in her wine, make it look like suicide. Grieving daughter couldn't handle losing her father. I'd rather not, Mom said, and for a moment I felt a flutter of hope that maternal instinct had kicked in. Then she continued, dead daughters raise questions, but if she were committed, declared mentally incompetent, I could manage her assets as her guardian. The recording played on each word another nail in their coffins. They discussed forging medical records, bribing Dr. Hoffman, manipulating Ryan. They laughed about Dad's death with Mom describing how easy it had been to switch his pills. They planned their escape to Costa Rica, the new identities they'd assumed, the life they'd build on stolen money. When it finally ended, the courtroom was tomb silent. Mom had collapsed in her chair, all fight gone. Derek stared at Thompson with pure hatred. Both defense attorneys looked like they'd swallowed glass. Your Honor, Chen said quietly, the prosecution requests the defendants be held without bail pending trial. We believe we've demonstrated clear premeditation, conspiracy, and ongoing danger to the community. Mr. Bradshaw, Mr. Sterling, any response to what we've just heard? Bradshaw stood slowly. We request a recess to confer with our clients. I bet you do, Judge Weinstein said. However, based on the evidence presented, I'm inclined to agree with the prosecution. The defendants will be remanded to custody without bail. Furthermore, I'm adding attempted murder charges for the conspiracy against Eleanor Matthews and Kara Matthews. Your Honor, Sterling tried one last time. My client was clearly manipulated by Grace Matthews. The recording shows she was the primary architect. Nice try, counselor, the judge interrupted, but your client seemed plenty enthusiastic about murder on that tape. Both defendants will be held pending trial. Court is adjourned. As the bailiffs led Mom and Derek away, Mom turned to look at me. Her face was streaked with tears, her expression a mix of hatred and something that might have been regret. I'm still your mother, she called out. No, I said quietly, knowing she couldn't hear me but needing to say it anyway. My mother died the day she killed my father. The courtroom began to empty, but I sat frozen in place. Ryan put his arm around my shoulders and I realized I was shaking. Ada Chen approached us, her expression sympathetic but satisfied. You did well, both of you, she said. Ryan, your recording from the storage unit meeting gave us everything we needed to flip one of Derek's associates. He's agreed to testify about the previous murders in exchange for immunity. What happens now? I asked, suddenly exhausted. Now we prepare for trial. With Thompson's testimony and the evidence you gathered, we're looking at life sentences for both of them. Your father will get justice, Kara. Justice. The word felt both too small and too large for what we'd been through. As we left the courthouse, reporters descended like vultures, shouting questions about how it felt to send my mother to prison. I pushed through them silently, focusing on the bright California sun and the promise of a future free from lies. Back at my apartment, I found Eleanor waiting with tea and sandwiches. She'd moved in temporarily after the revelation about the poisoning, and her presence had become an unexpected comfort. Nancy bustled around the kitchen while Eleanor sat at my dining table looking through photo albums. How did it go? Eleanor asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. They're being held without bail. The FBI had an undercover agent recording them for months. Eleanor nodded slowly. Your father always said the truth has a way of surfacing. He was right, wasn't he? I sat beside her looking at the photos of happier times, family barbecues, beach trips, holiday gatherings. In every picture, Mom smiled beautifully, the perfect wife and mother. How had none of us seen the darkness beneath? I keep wondering if I should have known, I admitted, if there were signs I missed. Eleanor closed the album gently. Evil often wears a beautiful mask, dear. The important thing is that when you did see the truth, you had the courage to act. Not everyone would have. As the sun set over Los Angeles, painting the sky in shades of justice and redemption, I thought about the trial ahead. There would be more recordings to hear, more evidence to present, more painful truths to confront. But for the first time since Dad's death, I felt something like peace. The storage unit meeting Ryan had attended while wearing a wire had revealed one final piece of the puzzle. Derek had kept trophies from his previous victims' jewelry and photographs hidden in a climate-controlled unit. Among them was a heart-shaped locket I recognized from family photos. It had belonged to Derek's first victim, Patricia Holbrook, who'd been all of 28 when she died. She'd had 2 young children who were now being raised by their grandmother. Those children would get justice, too. All of Derek's victims would. And somewhere I hope Dad was watching, knowing that his daughter had fought for truth, even when it meant destroying the woman who'd given me life. The war wasn't over. There was still a trial to get through, media attention to navigate, and a family to somehow rebuild from the ashes of betrayal. But tonight, with Eleanor's steady presence and Ryan's newfound strength beside me, I allowed myself a moment of victory. Tomorrow would bring new battles. Tonight, we'd won the first crucial fight for justice. The call came at 11:43 that night, 12 hours after the preliminary hearing. I'd been lying awake replaying Thompson's recording in my mind when my phone lit up with the county jail's number. Against my better judgment, I answered. You have a collect call from an inmate at Los Angeles County Jail, the automated voice announced. To accept, press 1. My finger hovered over the button. Eleanor, reading in the guest room, had warned me this would happen. She'll try to manipulate you, she'd said. It's what she does best. But some masochistic part of me needed to hear what Mom would say now that her schemes had unraveled. I pressed 1. Kara. Mom's voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual artificial sweetness. Oh, sweetheart, thank God you answered. What do you want, Grace? Using her first name felt like armor. A sob crackling through the phone line. I'm your mother. Doesn't that mean anything to you? It used to, I said quietly, before you murdered Dad. I didn't. She caught herself probably remembering that jail calls were recorded. Kara, you have to understand. Derek manipulated me. He's a master at this, at finding vulnerable women and twisting their minds. You heard Sterling's presentation about his past victims. I almost laughed at the irony. You mean the victims you studied before approaching him, the ones whose deaths you used as a blueprint? Silence stretched between us before she tried a different approach. I'm scared, Kara. The other inmates, they know who I am, what I'm accused of. They look at me like I'm a monster. You poisoned your husband and tried to kill your mother-in-law, I reminded her. What would you call that? A mistake. The words burst out desperately. I was grieving, confused. Derek promised me a new life, a chance to be happy again. He made it all sound so reasonable, so necessary. Switching Dad's heart medication was reasonable. Another sob, perfectly timed. Even now, even caught, she was performing. Can you come see me? Please, just once. Let me explain face to face. You owe me that much. I owe you nothing. I gave you life. Her voice rose sharply before she caught herself. I'm sorry. I'm falling apart here. Derek's turned everyone against me. Even my lawyer thinks I'm guilty. You're the only one who really knows me, who might understand. I thought I knew you, I corrected. Turns out I never did. Her tone shifted again, becoming softer, more calculating. Remember when you were 8 and broke Grandma's antique vase? You were so scared, but I told everyone I did it. I protected you. You also told me I'd ruined everything and made me do extra chores for a month, I shot back. Even your kindness came with a price. I need your help, she said, abandoning pretense. The FBI is offering me a deal. If I testify against Derek, tell them everything about his previous crimes, they might reduce my sentence. But I need leverage. I need something to trade. And you think I'd help you? There are things you don't know, she said quietly. Things about your father's business, about where some of the money really came from. Things that could hurt innocent people if they came out during the trial. My blood chilled. Was she threatening to destroy Dad's reputation from beyond the grave? Dad's business was completely legitimate. Was it? Are you sure? Because Derek found some very interesting documents in your father's files. Documents that suggest his construction company sometimes cut corners, used substandard materials. That collapsed parking structure in Riverside 5 years ago. Your father built that. I closed my eyes, remembering the news coverage. 3 people had been injured when the structure failed. Dad had been devastated, even though the official investigation blamed ground settling, not construction flaws. You're lying, I said, but uncertainty crept into my voice. Am I, or am I trying to protect your father's legacy? Help me, and those documents stay buried. Refuse, and well, Derek's lawyer is very interested in anything that might shift blame away from his client. You're trying to blackmail me from jail. I'm trying to survive, she hissed. Do you know what happens to women like me in prison? 25 to life, Kara. I'll die in here. Is that what you want? To know your mother is rotting in a cell while you live in the house, bought with your father's blood money? The accusation hit like a physical blow. How dare you? I'll dare anything, she interrupted, because I have nothing left to lose. But you do. You have your reputation, your career, your father's memory. Work with me and we both win. Fight me and I'll burn it all down. Like you burned down our family. Our family was already broken. The words exploded through the phone. Your father and his perfect principles, his holier-than-thou attitude. Do you know what it's like living with someone who judges your every move, who makes you feel small and stupid and never quite good enough? Oh, so you killed him? I set myself free. She caught herself again, breathing heavily. I mean, that's what Derek convinced me I was doing. He showed me how trapped I was, how much better life could be. With stolen money and fake identities. With love, she insisted. Real, passionate love, not the obligatory affection of a man who married me because I was pregnant and it was the right thing to do. The words hung between us like poison. Pregnant. I'd been born 7 months after my parents' wedding, but they'd always said I was premature. Another lie, or the truth twisted to hurt. That's not true, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my ears. Ask Margaret, Mom said coolly. Ask her about the shotgun wedding, about how your grandmother forced your father to do right by me. Ask her about the prenup I had to sign promising I'd get nothing if I left. Dad loved you. Dad loved his image of me, the dutiful wife, the perfect mother, but underneath, he was already planning to leave. I found the divorce papers in his desk 3 months before he died, hidden under financial documents half completed. He was going to abandon me with nothing. My world tilted. Divorce papers, Dad had never mentioned being unhappy, but then would he have told me I'd been his daughter, not his confidant? Even if that's true, I managed it doesn't justify murder. Doesn't it? Her voice turned philosophical. He was going to destroy my life, leave me with nothing after 25 years of service. Derek just showed me another option. An option that involved killing your mother-in-law, too. Eleanor never accepted me, Mom said bitterly. 30 years of snide comments and cold shoulders, acting like I wasn't good enough for her precious son. She deserved a taste of her own medicine. So you gave her actual medicine poison. I gave her what she'd been giving me for years, a slow, subtle toxin that made her feel weak and confused. Poetic justice. The casual cruelty in her voice made me nauseous. This wasn't desperation talking anymore. This was the real Grace Matthews stripped of pretense. I have to go, I said. Wait. Desperation crept back in. Just think about what I said, about those documents. Your father's reputation doesn't have to die with him. Help me, and... I hung up. My hands were shaking as I set the phone down. The apartment felt too quiet, too still. I walked to the window, looking out at the city lights, trying to process what I'd just heard. Dad planning to divorce, Mom hidden documents about his business. How much of it was truth and how much was manipulation? A soft knock on my door made me jump. Eleanor stood there in her robe, concern etched on her face. I heard the phone, she said simply. Grace. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Come, Eleanor said, leading me to the kitchen. I'll make cocoa, and you can tell me what poison she tried to pour in your ear this time. As Eleanor bustled around the kitchen, I recounted the conversation. Her face remained carefully neutral until I mentioned the divorce papers and the shotgun wedding. Then she sighed deeply. I suppose some truths can't stay buried forever, she said, sitting across from me. Your parents' marriage wasn't a fairy tale, that's true. And yes, your conception preceded their wedding, but not because your father was forced. Then why? Because he loved you before you were even born, Eleanor said firmly. The moment Grace told him she was pregnant, he proposed. Not from obligation, but from joy. He wanted you, Kara, wanted to be your father more than anything. But the divorce papers... Eleanor was quiet for a moment. I don't know about any papers, but I do know your parents went through a rough patch about 2 years ago. Your father suspected Grace was having an affair, not with Derek, with someone else. They went to counseling, seemed to work things out. If he considered divorce, he never followed through. And his business, the parking structure. Your father was the most ethical man I ever knew, Eleanor said firmly. If there were problems with any of his projects, he would have made them right. Grace is grasping at straws, trying to muddy waters that are already black with her guilt. We sat in silence, sipping cocoa while the city hummed beyond the windows. Finally, Eleanor spoke again. She'll keep trying, you know. Tomorrow, next week during the trial, she'll say anything hurt anyone to save herself. It's who she is. Who was she always like this, I asked. Or did I just never see it? People like Grace are excellent at showing you what you want to see, Eleanor said thoughtfully. You wanted a loving mother, so that's what she played. Your father wanted a devoted wife, so she wore that mask too. But underneath, I think she's always been calculating, always been willing to do whatever served her interests. Then why did Dad stay with her? Because he loved you and Ryan, because he believed in commitment, because, for all her faults, Grace could be charming when she chose, and because sometimes we see what we need to see in the people we love until we can't anymore. My phone rang again, the jail. I let it go to voicemail this time, and then again when it rang 10 minutes later. By the fifth call, I turned the phone off entirely. Schmuggles good, Eleanor said approvingly. You've given her enough of your time, enough of your pain. Let her sit with her own choices. As we prepared for bed, I couldn't shake the image of Mom in her cell desperately calling a phone that would never answer. Part of me, the part that remembered bedtime stories and birthday cakes, felt guilty. But the larger part, the part that had listened to her casual confession of murder, felt only resolve. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be lawyers to meet evidence to review, and probably more attempts at manipulation to resist. But tonight I'd drawn a line. Grace Matthews had taken my father, tried to take my grandmother, and attempted to steal my future. She wouldn't take another moment of my peace. The war between us wasn't over. If anything, her desperation signaled it was about to intensify. But I had truth on my side, family at my back, and the memory of a father who'd loved me from the moment he knew I existed. It would have to be enough. Grace's unconscious form looked almost peaceful, sprawled across my sofa, her perfectly manicured hand still clutching the wine glass she'd meant for me. The Ativan she'd dissolved in my drink had taken effect quickly on her. The old switcheroo, a classic move I'd learned from too many detective novels, had worked perfectly. While she slept off her own drugging attempt, I had work to do. Her phone lay beside her purse unlocked, thanks to her face recognition, working even in sleep. I felt a moment's hesitation. This was still my mother, whatever she'd done. Then I remembered Dad's laughter, silenced forever, and Eleanor's months of poisoning. My hand steadied as I began scrolling through her messages. The sheer volume of communication between her and Derek was staggering. Thousands of texts dating back over a year, far longer than she'd admitted. But it was the encrypted messaging app hidden in a folder labeled Recipes that revealed the real story. Banking complete. Read a message from 3 days ago. Moved another $500K to account 3847B. Liquidation of the art collection. Netted 1.2 ma'am. We're almost ready, my treasure. Grace had responded, My captain soon will sail away from all this ugliness. Did you handle the Eleanor problem? Increasing the dosage as discussed. The old bird should be singing her last song within the month. They'd given each other nautical nicknames like teenagers in love, but the content was anything but innocent. I screenshot everything, sending copies to my cloud storage and to Agent Thompson's secure email. Each message revealed another layer of their scheme. Then I found the folder labeled Insurance. My blood chilled as I read document after document, forged papers with my signature, fake contracts for non-existent consulting work. Fabricated emails between me and offshore shell companies. They'd created an entire alternate history where I was embezzling from my own company. If anything went wrong, I was their scapegoat. Oh, frame job needs updating. Derek had written 2 weeks ago. Add more transactions. Make it look like she's been stealing for years. Already on it, Grace replied. I've got copies of her signature going back to college. Practice makes perfect. My mother had been practicing my signature. The violation felt personal in a way even the murder plot hadn't. She'd studied how I wrote my name perfected, copying the thing that marked my identity, all to destroy me if needed. But the worst was yet to come. In a folder marked Health Records, I found something that made my stomach turn. Detailed notes about Eleanor's medication dosages effects. Grace had been keeping a poisoning diary like some kind of twisted science experiment. And day 12 increased to 15 milligrams. Subject showing mild confusion but still too lucid. Derek suggests 20 milligrams. Day 23. Perfect balance achieved. Subject appears senile to visitors, but not serious enough for hospitalization. Maintain current dosage. Day 45. Subject tried to refuse tea, had to mix into her soup instead. Consider IV administration if resistance continues. Subject. They'd reduced my grandmother to a test subject documenting her suffering with clinical detachment. But Grace had made one crucial error. She'd included photos. Pictures of Eleanor looking progressively more ill, timestamps proving Grace was present during each decline. I kept digging, finding more than I'd bargained for. Grace hadn't just been stealing from the family, she'd been embezzling from 3 separate charities where she served on the board. The Children's Hospital Fund, the literacy program, the animal shelter, all had been steadily drained to fund her new life with Derek. One message thread made me pause. It was with someone named Victoria Chen, not related to Ada Monica Chen, thankfully. The messages dated back 3 years long before Derek entered the picture. The package was perfect, Victoria had written. He never suspected a thing. Heart attack at his desk, just like you said. Glad to help, Grace had responded. Remember, grief is your best friend now. Cry at the funeral, but not too much. You need to seem strong for the estate lawyers. My hands trembled as I realized what I was reading. Grace had been teaching other women how to kill their husbands. She wasn't Derek's student, she was his mentor. How many deaths were on her hands? How long had she been planning Dad's murder? I found her banking app next, hidden behind a calculator facade. The main accounts were expected checking savings, the joint accounts she'd shared with Dad. But there were others accounts I'd never seen before. Swiss banks, Cayman Islands holdings, cryptocurrency wallets. The total made me gasp, $12 million. Where had it all come from? I cross-referenced dates and amounts with other documents. Some matched the charity embezzlements. Others aligned with Dad's life insurance payout, but there were deposits going back 10 years long before any of this started. Regular monthly amounts that looked suspiciously like blackmail payments. A secured folder required additional authentication. I used Grace's thumb while she slept, and what I found inside explained everything. Photos, videos, documents. Grace had been collecting dirt on wealthy families for over a decade. Affairs, tax evasion, corporate fraud, she had it all carefully organized with payment schedules attached. Judge Harrison, who'd helped with our sting operation, appeared in one file. Photos of him from 15 years ago at what looked like an underground casino. The payments had stopped 5 years ago with a note, debt cleared, no further contact. Even in her criminal enterprise, Grace had been methodical. She never pushed too hard, never demanded too much. Just steady monthly payments that her victims could rationalize as consulting fees or investment returns. It was brilliant in its simplicity. My phone buzzed with a text from Ryan at the storage unit. Derek's here with 3 men, in position. Right. While I'd been lost in Grace's digital crimes, my brother was risking his life wearing a wire. I texted back, "Be careful, FBI is listening." Grace stirred on the couch, mumbling something about boats and treasure. Even in her drugged sleep, she dreamed of escape. I quickly photographed several more documents, including one that made me pause a will she'd drafted leaving everything to various charities. It was dated just last week. Why would she create this if she planned to flee? Unless I checked the beneficiary details more carefully. Every charity listed was bogus shells that traced back to accounts Derek controlled. If Grace died unexpectedly, Derek would inherit everything through fake philanthropic organizations. They weren't just partners, they were planning to eventually betray each other. Another folder caught my eye: contingency plans. Inside were detailed scenarios for different outcomes. If Derek was arrested, but Grace wasn't. If Grace was caught, but Derek escaped. If they were both captured. Each plan included elimination protocols for loose ends. My name appeared on every list. So did Ryan's, and Eleanor's, and Margaret's. Even Nancy Eleanor's caregiver was marked for retirement once they were safely away. They planned to leave no witnesses, no one who could testify about their crimes. But the most chilling document was labeled Primary Target History. It was about Dad. Pages and pages of surveillance notes dating back 2 years. His routines, his medications, his stress levels. They'd studied him like predators, studying prey, noting when he was alone, when he was vulnerable. Subject shows increased fatigue during tax season. Optimal window for implementation. Subject's trust in G remains absolute. No suspicion of preparation activities. Medication switch successful. Subject complained of mild chest pain but attributed to stress. Proceeding to phase 2. They documented his murder in real time, taking notes like scientists observing an experiment. The final entry was dated the day before his death. All preparations complete. Tomorrow, freedom begins. I photographed everything, my phone's storage filling with evidence of crimes I'd never imagined. Grace hadn't just killed my father. She'd built an empire of extortion, theft, and murder. Derek wasn't her corruptor. He was her latest accomplice in a career that spanned decades. A text from Ryan. Meeting's over, got everything. They're planning to leave tomorrow on a yacht, not a plane. Dock 47 Marina del Rey. Derek just gave me this address to meet them later tonight. Says it's where they're keeping more evidence to frame you. I texted Agent Thompson the dock information immediately. Their escape route was closing even as they planned it. But the address Ryan mentioned intrigued me. If they had more fabricated evidence against me, I needed to see it. Grace stirred again, this time her eyes fluttering. I quickly closed all the apps and placed her phone back beside her. By the time she opened her eyes fully, I was sitting in the chair across from her, sipping the wine she'd meant to drug me with. "How are you feeling, Mom?" I asked pleasantly. "You seem tired, so I let you rest." She sat up groggily, confusion clouding her features. What happened? You were telling me about how Derek manipulated you. I lied smoothly. Then you just dozed off mid-sentence. Must be the stress. Grace looked at the wine glasses, hers empty, mine half full, and I saw the calculation in her eyes. She thought her plan had failed naturally, that I'd somehow avoided drinking enough to be affected. "Yes," she said slowly, "the stress has been overwhelming." "You should go home and rest," I suggested. "We can talk more tomorrow." She gathered her things unsteadily, shooting suspicious glances at me. "You seem different tonight, Kara. More aware." "Maybe I'm finally seeing things clearly," I replied. After she left, I sat in my apartment surrounded by the ghosts of every revelation. My mother wasn't a woman who'd snapped under pressure or been led astray by a charming criminal. She was the criminal had been for years, and Dad's death was just one more transaction in her ledger of horrors. I called Agent Thompson. "I'm sending you everything, and you need to know that yacht Derek mentioned they're planning to leave tomorrow night from Marina del Rey Dock 47. "Excellent work. We'll be ready. Are you okay?" I just discovered my mother was a serial killer blackmailer and had been planning to murder our entire family. "I'll survive," I said finally. "Your brother did well tonight. We got clear audio of Derek discussing the previous murders. Combined with what you found, we have enough to put them both away forever." Forever. The word echoed as I ended the call. By tomorrow night, it would all be over. The woman who'd given me life would be in custody for taking so many others. The strange symmetry wasn't lost on me. She'd brought me into this world, and I was sending her out of it, at least the free part of it. I poured the drugged wine down the sink, watching it swirl away like Grace's carefully constructed life. Tomorrow would bring arrests, trials, and justice. But tonight, surrounded by evidence of unfathomable betrayal, I mourned the mother I'd never actually had, and the father whose death was even crueler than I'd imagined. The hidden accounts held more than money. They held the truth about Grace Matthews, a truth so dark that even Derek Callahan looked like an amateur in comparison. And somewhere in that darkness was my origin story, born from calculation rather than love, saved only by a father who'd chosen to see light where there was none. Ryan arrived at my apartment at 7 in the morning, looking haggard but determined. The wire he'd worn to yesterday's storage unit meeting had left faint red marks on his chest, but his eyes held a clarity I hadn't seen since before Dad's death. He set a flash drive on my kitchen counter with shaking hands. "I made copies of everything from the storage unit," he said. "Kara, what they're planning, it's worse than we thought." I poured him coffee while he gathered his thoughts. Through the kitchen window, Los Angeles was waking up to another smoggy Tuesday, oblivious to the drama about to unfold at a rundown storage facility in Van Nuys. Derek's associates aren't just muscle," Ryan began. "One of them is a document forger who specializes in historical revision. They've created an entire alternative timeline where you've been embezzling for 5 years. Bank records, emails, even security footage, all fake but incredibly convincing." "I saw some of it on Grace's phone last night," I admitted. "But there's more. So much more." Ryan pulled up files on my laptop. "They've got fake therapy records showing you've been treated for kleptomania and pathological lying since college. Forged letters from you to Dad confessing your gambling addiction. Even a suicide note in your handwriting explaining how guilty you feel about stealing from the family." The suicide note made me pause. They're not just planning to frame me, they're planning to, kill you and make it look self-inflicted, Ryan finished. "The storage unit meeting was supposed to be where they convinced me to help lure you somewhere isolated. They offered me $2 million and freedom from all my debts if I just get you to trust me one more time." "But you didn't," I said, studying my brother's face. "No," his voice was firm. "Whatever else I've done, however weak I've been, I won't help them hurt you. Dad would never forgive me. I'd never forgive myself. Ryan, about yesterday's meeting, you said Derek's associates would be there. Tell me everything." He pulled out a small notebook, his handwriting shaky but legible. 3 men. The forger goes by Picasso, real creative. He's thin, nervous, kept checking exits like he expected cops to burst in any moment. The second was Marcus Webb, Derek's enforcer. 6'4", probably 250 prison tattoos on his neck. The kind of guy who hurts people for fun. And the third. Ryan's face darkened. That's the interesting part. He introduced himself as Mr. Smith, obviously fake. Well-dressed, soft-spoken, but the other 2 deferred to him. Even Derek seemed nervous around him. He had this way of looking at you like he was calculating how many pieces he could cut you into. "Did you get photos?" "The FBI did. They had cameras in my buttons." Ryan tapped the flash drive. "But there's something else. While they were showing me the forged documents, I saw a file they didn't mean to reveal. It had Eleanor's name on it." My blood chilled. What about Eleanor? Medical records, real ones, not forged. From 15 years ago when Grandpa was still alive. Routine blood work that showed unusual toxins in her system. "Kara, I think Grace has been poisoning family members for a lot longer than we realized." I thought back to Grandpa's death, sudden heart failure at 70, despite being in good health. Eleanor had been devastated, aged 10 years overnight. But what if it wasn't grief that aged her? What if it was poison administered by her daughter-in-law in doses just small enough to avoid detection? There's more, Ryan continued. The storage unit isn't just where they keep evidence, it's where they store trophies. Jewelry from Derek's previous victims, photos of Grace with men who died mysteriously, and something else, a collection of obituaries, all marked with red X's. How many? At least 20, some going back to when Grace was in college. Kara, I don't think Dad was her first husband to die unexpectedly. My mind raced. If Grace had been killing since college, that meant pull up any information about Grace's life before Dad, marriage records, death certificates, anything. While Ryan searched, I called Agent Thompson. We need to move the timeline up. They're more dangerous than we thought, and they might run if they sense we're closing in. Understood. Can your brother still make the meeting tonight? Ryan, I asked. They expect you back tonight? He nodded. 8 o'clock. Same storage unit. They want me to confirm you'll meet me for dinner tomorrow at Chez Laurent. Said something about it being poetic. That's where Mom and Dad had their first date. I'll be there, I told Thompson. Full FBI backup. We're ending this tonight. Kara, no, Ryan protested. It's too dangerous. Let the FBI handle it alone. They need me as bait, I said firmly. Otherwise, Derek might smell a trap. Besides, I want to look them in the eyes when they realize they've lost. We spent the next hour preparing. Ryan would go to the storage unit wearing a new wire this time with video capability. He'd confirm my agreement to dinner while the FBI moved into position. Once Derek and his associates were inside, they'd seal the exits and make the arrests. So I found something, Ryan announced, pulling up old records. Grace was married once before Dad, to a professor named William Hendricks. He died in a car accident 2 years into the marriage. Single car drove off a cliff. Grace inherited his estate and life insurance. Any investigation? None. Ruled accidental. But look at this, 3 months before his death, he'd been hospitalized for unexplained dizzy spells and vision problems. Sound familiar? It did. Dad had complained of similar symptoms in the weeks before his death. We'd attributed it to stress, but now? She tests the poisons first, I said, understanding dawning. Small doses to see effects, then escalates to lethal levels. That's why she keeps such detailed notes on Eleanor. She's still in the testing phase. My phone rang, Eleanor's number. Grandma. Kara, dear, I'm at the hospital with Nancy. I had another dizzy spell, but I'm fine. They're running tests. Don't eat or drink anything that doesn't come directly from the medical staff, I said urgently. I'll be right there. I haven't consumed anything from home in weeks, Eleanor assured me. I've been very careful since our revelation. But Kara, the doctors found something odd in my blood work. They want to speak with you. I grabbed my keys. Ryan, stay here and keep preparing for tonight. Don't answer the door for anyone except the FBI. The drive to Cedars-Sinai felt endless. When I arrived, Eleanor was sitting up in bed, looking irritated but alert. Nancy hovered protectively nearby while a doctor reviewed charts. Ms. Matthews, Dr. Singh was young but serious. Your grandmother's blood work shows traces of ethylene glycol antifreeze. Not enough to cause immediate harm, but consistent with long-term low-level exposure. How long-term? Based on the metabolite levels, years, maybe a decade or more. Has your grandmother had any chronic health issues? I thought of all the times Eleanor had seemed weak or confused at family gatherings, how Grace always rushed to help with her tea. Can you test for historical exposure, going back 15 years? Dr. Singh looked puzzled but nodded. We can analyze hair samples for timeline patterns. May I ask why? Because we suspect someone has been slowly poisoning her for years, I said bluntly, and we need medical evidence for the prosecution. The doctor's eyes widened. I'll order comprehensive toxicology panels immediately, and I'll need to report this to the police. The FBI is already involved, I assured him. Just document everything carefully. Eleanor squeezed my hand. I always wondered why I felt worse after family dinners. I thought it was just age, maybe grief after your grandfather, to think she's been doing this for years. She won't hurt anyone else, I promised. Tonight we finish this. My phone buzzed. Ryan, Derek just texted. He's moving the meeting to 6 instead of 8. Says plans have accelerated. They were getting nervous. Good. Nervous criminals made mistakes. I texted Thompson about the time change, then looked at Eleanor. I have to go. There's something I need to do. Be careful, dear, Eleanor said. Grace may have given birth to you, but you're nothing like her. You're your father's daughter, brave, principled, and fierce when protecting those you love. I kissed her forehead. Get some rest. By tomorrow, this will all be over. But as I left the hospital, I couldn't shake the feeling that Grace and Derek had one more card to play. They'd been too careful, too thorough to go down without a fight. Whatever happened at that storage unit tonight, I needed to be ready for anything. The sun was already sinking toward the Pacific, painting the sky blood red. Appropriate considering how much blood was on Grace's hands. 20 obituaries marked with red X's. 20 lives stolen by a woman I'd called Mom. I thought of Dad as I drove back to my apartment. He'd known something was wrong. The divorce papers hidden in his desk proved that, but he'd stayed probably for Ryan and me, never suspecting his wife wasn't just unhappy, but homicidal. I'm going to stop her, Dad, I whispered to the empty car. I promise. Tonight, the storage unit in Van Nuys would become a trap. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Grace had taught Derek well, and students sometimes surpass their teachers. Whatever they'd planned, whatever final move they'd prepared, I'd need all my strength and cunning to survive it. The war was entering its final phase, and only one side would emerge victorious. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, preparing for battle. In 3 hours, it would all be over, one way or another. Eleanor was waiting in my apartment when I returned from the hospital, which should have been impossible since I'd left her in a hospital bed an hour ago. She sat in my living room, back straight, eyes sharp, wearing a black suit I'd never seen before. Nancy stood beside her, but something was different. The usual caregiver's gentle demeanor replaced by alert professionalism. Hello, dear, Eleanor said calmly. We need to talk before tonight's festivities. How did the hospital... Oh, that... Eleanor waved dismissively. A bit of theater. The doctors are real, the poisoning is real, but my collapse was carefully timed. I needed Grace to believe her plan was working while I put my own pieces in place. I sank into the opposite chair, my mind reeling. You've been pretending this whole time. Not the whole time. The first few months of poisoning caught me off guard, but once I realized what was happening, I had choices to make. I could confront Grace and risk escalation, or I could play along while building my case. Eleanor's smile was sharp as a blade. I chose the long game. And Nancy? The woman I'd thought was just a caregiver extended her hand. Nancy Chen, private investigator. Mrs. Matthews hired me 18 months ago when she first suspected Grace was drugging her. 18 months. I stared at Eleanor. You've known that long. Shh, suspected, Eleanor corrected. But suspicion isn't evidence. So I let Grace poison me in carefully controlled doses, always with antidotes ready while Nancy documented everything. Every visit, every cup of tea, every symptom. That's insane. You could have died. But I didn't. Eleanor's eyes glinted. And now I have medical records proving systematic poisoning over years. More importantly, I have this. Nancy handed me a thick folder. Inside were photographs, bank records, correspondence, a parallel investigation to mine, but going back much further. I started looking into Grace after your grandfather died, Eleanor explained. His death was too convenient, too sudden. A healthy man doesn't just drop dead whatever the doctors say. So I hired investigators quietly, carefully. And you found everything. Grace's first husband, the professor, 2 other men she dated who died mysteriously, the charity embezzlements. I'm on those boards too, you know? I've been documenting her crimes for 5 years, waiting for her to make a mistake big enough to ensure conviction. Derek was the mistake. Eleanor nodded. When she brought that serpent into our family, I knew she'd finally overreached. But I needed more than history. I needed current conspiracy, attempted murder, something undeniable. So I became the perfect victim. I flipped through the folder, seeing crime after crime documented with meticulous care. Why didn't you tell me? Because you needed to discover it yourself, Eleanor said gently. Your investigation, your evidence, your testimony will convict her. Mine is just supporting documentation. Besides, I wasn't sure initially whether you or Ryan might be involved. You suspected us. I suspect everyone, dear. It's how I've survived 85 years in this world. But you proved yourself when you started investigating instead of benefiting. And Ryan, bless him, proved himself when he chose family over money. Speaking of Ryan, I checked my phone. He's meeting Derek in 2 hours. The FBI will be there, but... About that, Eleanor interrupted, there's something you don't know about Derek's silent partner, the well-dressed man Ryan mentioned, Mr. Smith. My blood chilled. You know who he is! Jonathan Ashford. He goes by many names, but I knew him as the man who tried to marry me 15 years ago, shortly after your grandfather's death. I stared at her. What? Oh, yes. Charming, sophisticated, everything a wealthy widow could want. But something felt off, so I had him investigated. He'd left a trail of dead wives across Europe. When I confronted him, he vanished overnight. I thought he'd fled the country. But he's been here all along. Building a network, Nancy said. We've traced connections between Ashford Derek and at least 12 other con artists targeting wealthy families. Grace didn't just find Derek by chance. She was recruited into their organization. The implications hit me like a sledgehammer. This wasn't just about Grace and Derek. There was an entire network of killers operating in Los Angeles, preying on the wealthy and vulnerable. The FBI doesn't know, I breathed. They do now, Eleanor said. I sent Agent Thompson everything an hour ago. But Ashford is clever. He'll have escape routes, contingencies. That's why I'm going to the storage unit tonight. Absolutely not, I said firmly. You're 85 and recovering from poisoning. Eleanor laughed to sound like silver bells with edges. I'm 85 and angry. There's a difference. Besides, I have something Ashford wants, the evidence I gathered on him 15 years ago. Photos that would interest Interpol, documents linking him to murders across 3 continents. You kept evidence on a serial killer for 15 years. In a safety deposit box, yes, along with instructions for its release if anything happened to me. It's why he never came after me. Directly killing me would have triggered an avalanche of exposure. But now he thinks you're senile, I said, understanding dawning. He thinks it's safe. Exactly. Grace has been reporting my deterioration to him for months. He'll be at that storage unit tonight believing he's finally safe from the crazy old woman who nearly exposed him. Eleanor's smile was predatory. Surprise. My phone rang. Ryan breathless and scared. Kara, change of plans. Derek wants to meet at a warehouse instead. Says the storage unit is compromised. I'm sending you the address. I showed Eleanor and Nancy the location. Nancy pulled up satellite images on her laptop, frowning. Isolated, multiple exits, poor cell coverage. It's a kill box. Then we don't go, I said. We go, Eleanor corrected, but on our terms. Nancy, call your contacts. I want eyes on every exit and backup plans for the backup plans. Mrs. Matthews, with respect. Nancy, I've been preparing for this moment for 15 years. Grace took my son. Ashford tried to take my life. Tonight, they both learn what happens when you threaten the Matthews family. There was steel in Eleanor's voice that reminded me of Dad at his most determined. This wasn't the grandmother who baked cookies and told stories. This was the woman who'd built a financial empire with Grandpa, who'd survived the Depression and 2 wars. This was Matthew's strength in its purest form. If we're doing this, I said, we do it smart. Ryan goes in wired. FBI surrounds the building. You stay in the surveillance van. I go in as the senile old woman they expect, Eleanor interrupted. Confused, vulnerable, perfect bait. While they're focused on me, you and the FBI move into position. That's insane. That's justice. Eleanor stood suddenly looking every inch the matriarch she'd always been. Grace has been poisoning me for years, thinking I was too weak to fight back. Ashford dismissed me as a threat because of my age and gender. Tonight, they learned how wrong they were. Nancy was already on the phone coordinating with contacts I hadn't known existed. Eleanor had built her own network while pretending to deteriorate. The student had indeed become the master, but the original teacher had never stopped learning. There's one more thing, Eleanor said, pulling out a small device. Grace's phone, I had Nancy clone it weeks ago. Every message, every call, every crime she thought was hidden. I thought of my own investigation into Grace's phone last night. You've been tracking everything. Everything, including the message she sent 20 minutes ago telling Derek you'd agreed to meet them. She's still trying to manipulate events from jail. How she's in custody? Guards can be bribed, dear, or blackmailed. Grace has dirt on half of Los Angeles, remember? She's more dangerous in a cage than free. A trapped animal fights hardest. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across my apartment. In an hour, we'd confront not just Derek and Grace's conspiracy, but an entire network of predators. The grandmother I'd thought needed protection had been playing a longer, deeper game than any of us. One question, I said. If you knew all this, why let it go so far? Why not stop Grace years ago? Eleanor's face softened. Because I hoped I was wrong. Despite everything, she was my son's wife, the mother of his children. I wanted to believe the accidents were just that, accidents. It wasn't until Derek arrived that I knew for certain what she was. And now? Now I finish what your father couldn't. Eleanor checked her antique watch, a gift from Grandpa 50 years ago. It's time. Nancy, are your people in position? 10-minute ETA to the warehouse. Drone surveillance is already active. Then let's give them a show they'll never forget. Eleanor moved toward the door with surprising grace. Coming, dear. I grabbed my jacket, checking the recording device hidden in my collar. The FBI would be listening. Nancy's team would be watching. But ultimately, this came down to family. The Matthews family versus those who'd tried to destroy it. For Dad, I said. For all of them, Eleanor replied. Every victim Grace and her network have taken. Tonight, we give them justice. As we headed into the Los Angeles twilight, I realized the trap we'd set might catch more than just Derek and Grace. If Eleanor was right about Ashford and his network, we were about to expose a conspiracy that stretched across decades and continents. But we were Matthews. We'd survive betrayal, poison, and murder. Whatever waited in that warehouse, we'd face it together, 3 generations of women bound by love loss and an unbreakable will to see justice done. The real war was about to begin. The warehouse in Vernon smelled of rust and old motor oil, its broken windows casting fractured light across the concrete floor. Ryan stood near a folding table where Derek had spread out documents, the forged evidence meant to destroy me, all waiting for signatures that would never come. The scene was perfectly staged, like a theater set before the curtain rises. I watched from the FBI surveillance van parked 2 blocks away, multiple screens showing different angles of the building. Agent Thompson sat beside me, calm and professional, while Nancy operated drone controls with practiced ease. Eleanor was already inside, having arrived separately in character as a confused elderly woman who'd wandered away from her caregiver. Audio check, Thompson murmured into his headset. All teams confirm position. One by one, 12 agents checked in. They were positioned at every exit, every window ready to move on Thompson's signal. But first, we needed everyone inside and incriminating themselves on record. Target approaching, Nancy announced. A black Mercedes pulled up to the warehouse. Derek emerged first, scanning the area with paranoid efficiency. Then came Mr. Smith, Jonathan Ashford, according to Eleanor, moving with the controlled grace of a predator. 2 more men followed muscle hired for tonight's activities. "Where's Grace?" I asked. "Being transported separately," Thompson said. "She posted bail an hour ago." "What?" I shot to my feet. "How is that possible? She was denied bail." "Emergency appeal. A judge named Carlson overturned the decision. We're investigating, but—" "Carlson's in her blackmail files," I interrupted. "She has photos of him at an underground casino. She's calling in favors." Thompson was already on his radio alerting units to watch for Grace, but I knew she'd come here. This warehouse wasn't just about signing papers, it was where they planned to stage my suicide. On screen, Eleanor wandered into view, playing her role perfectly. She clutched a large purse, mumbling about looking for her cat. Derek's irritation was visible even from the drone footage. "What's she doing here?" Derek snapped at Ryan. "I don't know," Ryan said, maintaining his cover. "She must have followed me. Grandma, you shouldn't be here." "Mr. Whiskers ran this way," Eleanor said vaguely, then focused on Ashford. "Jonathan, is that you? You look just like that nice man who wanted to marry me, but he went away." Ashford's face was a study in calculation. Kill her now and risk exposure, or play along and handle her quietly later. He chose caution. "Hello, Eleanor. You're confused. Let me call someone to take you home." "Grace takes me home," Eleanor said brightly. "She makes me special tea. It tastes funny, but she says it's good for me." "Eleanor knows," Derek said quietly to Ashford. "Even senile, she knows." "Then tonight solves multiple problems," Ashford replied. A second car arrived, a white SUV with tinted windows. My stomach clenched as Grace stepped out, no longer in prison orange, but wearing a designer suit, as if heading to a business meeting rather than a murder. She moved with confidence, clearly believing her network of blackmail victims would protect her. "Sorry, I'm late," Grace announced, entering the warehouse. Judge Carlson was reluctant, but I reminded him about his daughter's wedding next month. Amazing how cooperative people become when family is involved. She froze when she saw Eleanor. "Mother Matthews, what are you doing here?" "Looking for Mr. Whiskers," Eleanor repeated, then brightened. "Grace, did you bring my tea?" Grace's eyes narrowed. Something in Eleanor's tone, perhaps, or the way Ryan wouldn't meet her gaze. "Where's Kara?" "On her way," Derek said. "Ryan confirmed dinner tomorrow. We'll grab her then." "No." Grace's voice was sharp. "Something's wrong. She should be here. You said—" She stopped, really looking at the setup. Documents spread out, everyone positioned strategically, Eleanor's convenient appearance. "It's a trap." "You're paranoid," Derek started, but Grace was already backing toward the door. "Ryan's wearing a wire," she said with cold certainty. "Look at how he's standing, how he keeps touching his chest. And Eleanor, she's too clear, too present. She's acting." The game was up. Thompson spoke into his radio. "All units move in. Go, go, go." But Grace was already running. She'd parked specifically for quick escape, the SUV's engine still warm. As FBI agents flooded the warehouse, she peeled out tires, screaming against asphalt. "Units 3 and 4 pursue," Thompson commanded, then looked at me. "Stay here. We've got her." But I knew Grace better than they did. She'd have contingency plans, escape routes mapped and memorized. I thought of Dad, of all her victims of the justice about to slip away. "Like hell," I muttered, grabbing keys from the table. "Matthews, no," Thompson shouted, but I was already running. The FBI sedan was fast, but I knew these streets. More importantly, I knew Grace. She wouldn't head for the freeways where helicopters could track her. She'd go for the port where boats waited and international waters beckoned. I called Nancy's phone. "Where's she heading?" "South on Alameda. Kara, what are you doing?" "Ending this. Is Eleanor safe?" "Ah, secure. They got Ashford and Derek, but Kara—" I dropped the phone, focusing on driving. The white SUV was 3 blocks ahead, weaving through late evening traffic. Grace drove like she lived, ruthlessly efficient, willing to risk everything for survival. She turned hard onto a side street, and I recognized the route. The marina, of course. The yacht Derek had mentioned wasn't their only escape plan. Grace would have alternates, probably under false names, ready to sail at a moment's notice. Red and blue lights filled my mirrors, the FBI catching up, but Grace had too much of a lead. By the time they navigated the marina's security, she'd be in international waters. Unless someone who knew the shortcut stopped her. I yanked the wheel hard, tires protesting as I took an alley I discovered during high school sailing lessons. It would put me at dock 32 directly in Grace's path. The sedan erupted from the alley just as Grace's SUV rounded the corner. She saw me too late. I aimed for her front wheel, accepting the inevitable impact. The collision was brutal. Metal screamed, glass shattered, and the world spun in a kaleidoscope of pain and adrenaline. When everything stopped moving, I was looking through a spider-webbed windshield at Grace, 20 feet away, crawling from her overturned vehicle. Blood ran from a cut on her forehead, and her perfect suit was torn. But her eyes burned with the same cold fury I'd seen in the courtroom. She stood unsteadily, a gun appearing in her hand from somewhere. "You always were too stubborn," she said, voice carrying across the space between us. "Just like your father." I pushed my door open, staying behind it for cover. My ribs screamed protest, probably cracked, but I could move. "It's over, Grace. FBI's 30 seconds away." 30 seconds is a lifetime. She raised the gun, and I saw my death in her eyes. This woman who'd sung me lullabies and taught me to tie my shoes was going to kill me without hesitation. But she'd made one mistake. She'd forgotten about the person she'd dismissed as senile. Grace Matthews." Eleanor's voice rang out like thunder. Grace spun, and I saw Eleanor standing beside Nancy's car, having followed despite orders to stay safe. But this wasn't the confused elderly woman from the warehouse. This was Eleanor Matthews in her full power, spine straight and eyes blazing. "You killed my son." Eleanor continued, advancing steadily. "You poisoned me. You destroyed our family. But you failed in one crucial way. You underestimated the women you tried to destroy." "Stay back!" Grace aimed the gun at Eleanor, hand shaking. "I'll shoot." "No," Eleanor said calmly. "You won't, because you're a poisoner, Grace, a schemer. You kill slowly, secretly, savoring control. But face to face, you're a coward." Grace's finger tightened on the trigger, but hesitation cost her. I moved while she was distracted, tackling her from the side. The gun went off the shot, going wild, and then we were on the ground fighting for control. Grace was stronger than she looked, desperation lending her fury, but I had rage on my side for Dad, for Eleanor, for every victim in those obituaries. The gun skittered across the asphalt as we rolled, both reaching for it. Grace's fingers brushed the grip first, but Eleanor's cane came down hard on her wrist. The crack of breaking bone was audible, and Grace screamed. The gun spun away, and suddenly FBI agents were everywhere, pulling us apart, shouting commands. "Grace Matthews, you're under arrest for murder, attempted murder, conspiracy." The list went on, but I stopped listening. I sat on the cold ground, watching them handcuff the woman who'd given me life, and tried to take it. Grace didn't struggle now. She just stared at me with those cold eyes, and I saw the truth. She felt nothing. No remorse, no love, just anger at being caught. "Kara." Eleanor knelt beside me, her earlier strength giving way to grandmother concern. "Are you hurt?" "I'm okay. I managed, though. Everything hurt." "Is it really over?" "This part is." Eleanor helped me stand as EMTs arrived. "Derek and Ashford are in custody. The network they built will take time to dismantle, but the heads of the Hydra have been cut off." Agent Thompson appeared, looking simultaneously angry and impressed. "That was incredibly stupid, Matthews. Also incredibly brave. Your father would be proud." As they loaded Grace into a patrol car for the second time, she called out one last time, "Kara!" I turned, some foolish part of me hoping for last-minute remorse, an apology, anything human. "Sam, the beach house?" she said, smiling coldly. I really did sell it 3 days ago. Cash buyer offshore company, you'll never get it back. The door slammed shut, and she was gone. I stood there, ribs aching, heart aching worse. The beach house Dad's gift to me, our sanctuary lost forever. Even in defeat, she'd found a way to wound me. Actually, Nancy said, appearing with a tablet, about that. Mrs. Matthews had me monitoring all property transfers. The sale was to Blue Horizon LLC, registered in the Caymans. Can we trace it? Eleanor smiled. No need. I own Blue Horizon LLC. Set it up years ago for situations just like this. Congratulations, dear, you just bought your beach house from yourself. Though I'm afraid you overpaid terribly. Grace always was greedy. I stared at Eleanor, then started laughing. It hurt my ribs, but I couldn't stop. My grandmother had outplayed them all, turning Grace's final cruelty into nothing more than an expensive lesson in hubris. How long have you been planning this? I asked. Since the day she married my son, Eleanor admitted. I hoped I'd never need such safeguards, but hope isn't a strategy. Your grandfather taught me that. As the marina filled with emergency vehicles and curious onlookers, I realized the truth. This hadn't been my war or Eleanor's or even the FBI's. It had been a family's war against those who'd tried to destroy it. And we'd won not through violence or cruelty, but through patience, intelligence, and an unbreakable bond that survived even death. Come, Eleanor said, guiding me toward the ambulance. Let them check your ribs. Tomorrow we'll deal with trials and media and all the mess that follows. Tonight, we've earned our rest. I looked back once at the overturned vehicles, the crime scene tape already going up the end of Grace's dark kingdom. Somewhere I hoped Dad was watching, finally at peace. For you, Dad, I whispered. We got them all. The Los Angeles County Courthouse had become as familiar as my own apartment over the past 3 months. Today marked the beginning of week 4 of Grace's trial, and the prosecution was about to present their most damaging evidence, yet the full scope of her poisoning schemes dating back decades. I sat in my usual spot, second row behind the prosecution, with Eleanor on my right and Ryan on my left. The media sections were packed, court TV broadcasting live, turning our family tragedy into a national spectacle. Grace sat at the defense table in a conservative navy suit, her hair pulled back severely, playing the role of a wrongfully accused widow. Ada Monica Chen stood her presence commanding the room. The state calls Dr. Patricia Vance. Dr. Vance, the forensic toxicologist who'd analyzed years of evidence, took the stand with quiet authority. At 53, she'd spent her career unraveling poisoning cases. But even she seemed affected by what she'd discovered about Grace. Dr. Vance, Chen began, you've analyzed biological samples from Eleanor Matthews spanning 15 years. What did you find? Some systematic poisoning with multiple substances, Dr. Vance replied. The most consistent was ethylene glycol antifreeze in doses calculated to cause gradual deterioration without acute symptoms. But I also found traces of ricin arsenic and several cardiac glycosides. Can you explain the pattern? Dr. Vance pulled up a chart on the courtroom screen. The poisoning followed a sophisticated rotation schedule. Each toxin was used for several weeks, then switched before detection levels were reached. This suggests extensive knowledge of toxicology and careful planning. Objection, Bradshaw called out. Speculation about my client's knowledge. Oh, sustained. Judge Weinstein ruled. Stick to the medical findings, doctor. Dr. Vance nodded. The hospital records show Eleanor Matthews was admitted 17 times over 15 years, with symptoms consistent with poisoning, nausea, confusion, cardiac arrhythmias. Each time she recovered once removed from exposure. The pattern is textbook for chronic poisoning. Chen introduced hair samples, nail clippings, and blood work spanning years. Each piece of evidence built the timeline of Grace's attempted murder of her mother-in-law. But the real bombshell came when Chen asked about other victims. Did you analyze samples from the exhumed remains of Harold Matthews? The courtroom held its breath. Getting permission to exhume my father had been agonizing but necessary for justice. Yes, Dr. Vance said quietly. Despite the time elapsed, we found significant traces of digitoxin in the cardiac tissue, levels far exceeding therapeutic doses. What does that indicate? Harold Matthews was murdered. The digitoxin levels would have caused immediate cardiac arrest, mimicking a natural heart attack. Grace's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. She whispered urgently to Bradshaw, who stood to object but seemed to think better of it. Were there other victims? Chen continued. We analyzed samples from 3 other deaths connected to the defendant, Dr. Vance said. William Hendricks, her first husband. Marcus Webb, a business partner who died suddenly in 2015. And Patricia Coleman, who served on a charity board with the defendant. Your findings? Oh, all 3 showed evidence of poisoning. Different substances, Mr. Hendricks with strychnine, Mr. Webb with cyanide, Ms. Coleman with ricin, but all with the same careful calculation to avoid immediate detection. The gallery erupted in whispers. Judge Weinstein banged her gavel for order. I gripped Eleanor's hand, feeling her tremble. These weren't just statistics, they were people Grace had murdered while smiling at charity galas and family dinners. Chen moved to her next piece of evidence. Dr. Vance, I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 47. Can you identify this? It's a notebook recovered from the defendant's home safe. It contains detailed notes about poisoning methods, dosages, and effects on various victims. The prosecutor displayed pages on the screen. Grace's neat handwriting filled line after line with clinical observations. Subject showing expected confusion. Increased dosage to 15 milligrams. Cardiac symptoms presenting as planned. In your professional opinion, what does this notebook represent? A poisoning diary, Dr. Vance said bluntly. The defendant documented her crimes like a scientist conducting experiments. She noted successes, failures, and adjustments to her methods. Bradshaw finally stood. Objection. The witness can't testify to my client's intent or authorship. Your Honor, Chen responded, handwriting analysis has confirmed this is the defendant's writing. As for intent, the content speaks for itself. Overruled. Continue. Chen pulled up a specific page. Dr. Vance, please read the entry dated March 15th, 2 years ago. Dr. Vance adjusted her glasses. Harold, increasingly suspicious, mentioned feeling unwell after meals. Must accelerate timeline. Double digitoxin in evening medication. Should appear natural given his stress levels. And the entry from March 17th. Success. Harold collapsed at 9:43 p.m. EMTs arrived at 9:58. Pronounced at 10:21. Performed grief convincingly. Ryan and Kara suspected nothing. I bit my lip hard enough to taste blood. Hearing Grace's casual notes about murdering my father while Ryan and I grieved, Eleanor squeezed my hand tighter. One more entry, Chen said, June 12th of this year. Eleanor, proving resilient, 15 years of low-dose exposure building tolerance. Derek suggests switching to thallium, more aggressive but harder to detect. Need her estate transferred before year-end. Thank you, Dr. Vance. Chen turned to the jury. The defendant didn't just poison people, she documented it, refined a treated murder like a skill to be perfected. Bradshaw's cross-examination was desperate. He challenged the chain of evidence, questioned testing methods suggested contamination. But Dr. Vance remained unshakable, her expertise evident in every response. Isn't it possible someone else wrote this notebook? Bradshaw pressed. The handwriting analysis could be forged. My client is a victim of an elaborate frame-up orchestrated by Derek Callahan. Dr. Vance looked skeptical. Mr. Callahan would need extensive knowledge of toxicology, access to the defendant's home, and the ability to perfectly mimic her handwriting for hundreds of pages. Additionally, the notebook contains information only the poisoner would know exact times of administration-specific victim reactions. But it's possible. Anything is possible, Dr. Vance conceded, but the medical evidence combined with the documentary evidence presents a clear pattern spanning 2 decades. In my 30 years of experience, I've never seen such methodical long-term poisoning by anyone other than the perpetrator themselves. Bradshaw retreated damaged but not defeated. The day wasn't over. Chen called her next witness. The state calls Amy Morrison. Amy had been the nurse at the rehabilitation facility where Eleanor stayed briefly 5 years ago. She took the stand nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. Ms. Morrison, Chen began gently, do you recognize the defendant? Yes, she visited Mrs. Eleanor Matthews regularly during her stay at Sunset Manor. Did you observe anything unusual during these visits? Amy nodded. I saw Mrs. Grace switching medication bottles in Mrs. Eleanor's room. When I questioned her, she said she was organizing them, but later I found the original bottles in the trash with different pills inside. Did you report this? I tried, Amy said quietly, but Mrs. Grace complained to management about my harassment. I was transferred to night shift and eventually left the facility. Why come forward now? Because I saw the news about the trial. I realized what I'd witnessed might have been attempted murder. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Bradshaw attacked Amy's credibility, highlighting the 5-year gap, suggesting false memories. But her employment records corroborated the transfer and her written complaint about the medication switching. The most devastating testimony came after lunch. Chen called a surprise witness, Victoria Chen, the woman from Grace's encrypted messages. She entered wearing prison gray, having agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. Ms. Chen, the prosecutor, began, how do you know the defendants? We met at a widow's support group 8 years ago, Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. I was grieving my husband's death. Grace approached me after a meeting. What did she say? She asked if my husband's death had been sudden. When I said yes, a heart attack at 45, she said she understood my pain. Her first husband had died young too. Did your relationship progress beyond the support group? Victoria nodded. Grace became my friend. We had coffee, talked about our losses. Then one day she asked a strange question. She wanted to know if I'd suspected my husband had been unfaithful before he died. Had he been? Yes. I'd found evidence of an affair. Grace seemed to know without me telling her. She said something about how convenient his death must have been given the circumstances. The courtroom was silent, everyone sensing where this was heading. That's when she told me, Victoria continued. She said she'd helped other women whose husbands had betrayed them, women who needed freedom but couldn't afford divorce or scandal. She called it liberation services. Did she elaborate? She taught me about poisons, Victoria said, tears streaming down her face. Different types, how to administer them, how to avoid detection. She said she'd used them herself and could teach me for future reference. I was horrified, but also curious. My husband was already dead, but what if I needed such knowledge later? Did Grace admit to killing anyone? Not directly, but she showed me newspaper clippings of men who died suddenly, all married to women from our support group. She'd smile and say they'd found their freedom. Chen introduced the encrypted messages between Grace and Victoria, showing years of correspondence about poisoning methods, victim selection, and disposal of evidence. Grace had been running a murder consultation service, teaching other women to kill while perfecting her own methods. Ms. Chen, did Grace ever mention her current husband, Harold Matthews? Victoria closed her eyes. Yes. About 2 years ago, she said she was considering liberating herself again. Her husband was planning to leave her, and she couldn't face the humiliation. She asked my opinion on digitoxin versus ricin. What did you tell her? To get help, to see a therapist. I'd realized by then how sick the whole thing was, but Grace just laughed. She said therapy was for people who couldn't solve their own problems. The cross-examination was brutal. Bradshaw painted Victoria as a convicted killer trying to shift blame. But her immunity deal only covered testimony, not her own crimes, lending credibility to her account. As the day wound down, Chen introduced one final piece of evidence, a video from Grace's cloud storage apparently uploaded by accident. It showed Grace in her kitchen, carefully grinding pills while humming. The date stamp was March 15th, 2 days before Dad died. "No more testimony today," Judge Weinstein announced. "We'll resume tomorrow with the defense's case." As the courtroom emptied, I caught Grace's eye. For just a moment, her mask slipped completely. I saw no remorse, no humanity, just cold calculation and fury at being exposed. She'd spent 20 years poisoning her way to wealth and freedom, leaving a trail of bodies behind. Tomorrow, Bradshaw would try to paint her as Derek's victim, a woman manipulated into murder. But the evidence was overwhelming. Grace wasn't a victim. She was a predator who'd turned poison into an art form and murder into a business model. "Are you all right?" Eleanor asked as we left the courthouse. "I will be," I said, "when she's convicted, when all her victims get justice." Eleanor nodded, leaning heavily on her cane, not from poison now, but from the weight of hearing the full scope of Grace's evil. We'd survived her worst, but the scars would last forever. At least now the healing could begin. Derek Callahan sat in the witness box like a caged animal, his usual swagger replaced by the desperate energy of a cornered predator. Orange jail clothing had replaced his expensive suits, but his hair remained perfectly styled vanity intact, even facing life in prison. Today was his last gambit, testifying against Grace to save himself. "State your name for the record," his attorney Marcus Sterling began. "Dennis James Holbrook," Derek said, using his real name for the first time in court. "Though, I've been known as Derek Callahan for the past 3 years. Mr. Holbrook, you've agreed to testify truthfully in exchange for consideration in sentencing. Do you understand that any lies will nullify this agreement?" "I understand." Derek's eyes swept the courtroom, lingering on Grace with something between hatred and admiration. "I'm here to tell the truth about Grace Matthews and her murderous schemes." Sterling guided him through his background, the previous marriages, the dead wives, the trail of fraud across 3 states. Derek admitted to everything with calculated remorse, painting himself as a con artist who'd never killed until he met Grace. "When did you first encounter Mrs. Matthews?" Sterling asked. 2 years ago, at a charity gala in Beverly Hills, but she approached me, not the other way around." This caused a stir. The prosecution's narrative had Derek targeting Grace. "Explain." Derek shifted, playing to the jury. "I was working another mark, a widow named Patricia Holbrook. Grace watched me for weeks, saw my methods. Then one night, she cornered me in the hotel bar. She said she'd been looking for someone with my particular skills." "What skills?" "Making rich women fall in love," Derek said bluntly. "She'd researched my past, knew about the wives who'd died. She said she had a proposition, a partnership that would make us both wealthy beyond imagination." Grace's lawyer objected repeatedly, but Judge Weinstein allowed the testimony. Derek was offering new information, details that hadn't emerged in discovery. "What was this proposition?" Sterling continued. "Grace had a network," Derek explained. "Women she'd met through widow support groups, charity boards, country clubs, all wealthy, all unhappy in their marriages. She'd been teaching them about poisons for years, but she wanted to expand. With my ability to seduce and her knowledge of killing, we could build an empire." "Did you agree?" "Not at first. I was a thief, not a killer, but Grace was persuasive. She showed me her notebook, her record of successful murderers. 23 people over 18 years. She'd turned killing into a science." The gallery gasped. 23 was higher than anyone had estimated. Ryan grabbed my hand, his face pale. How many families had Grace destroyed while playing the perfect wife and mother? She seduced me, Derek continued. Not just romantically, but intellectually. She showed me how much more profitable murder was than simple theft. Dead spouses can't contest wills or track stolen funds. When did you begin your relationship? That night. But it was business first, pleasure second. Grace had already picked our first target, her mother-in-law, Eleanor Matthews. The old woman controlled the family trust. With her gone, Grace could access millions. Sterling introduced exhibits emails between Derek and Grace planning Eleanor's demise. The messages were clinical, discussing dosages and methods like a business correspondence. But the plan changed, Sterling prompted. Harold Matthews became suspicious, Derek said. He'd noticed his mother's symptoms, started asking questions. Grace decided he had to go first. She said it would be easier anyway. Everyone would assume the stress killed him. Did you participate in Harold Matthews' murder? Derek hesitated, clearly calculating how much truth would help versus harm him. I provided the digitoxin. Grace handled the actual poisoning. She knew his routines, his medications. All I did was supply the means. That's still murder, Sterling reminded him. Yes, Derek admitted, but I didn't know she'd already killed so many. I thought Harold would be our only victim, that we'd take the money and disappear. I didn't realize I was just the latest tool in her collection. Ada Chen stood for cross-examination, her expression skeptical. Mr. Holbrook, you've confessed to marrying and stealing from multiple women. Why should we believe anything you say? Because I kept records, Derek said simply. Every conversation with Grace, every plan, every payment. I may be a thief, but I'm not stupid. I knew she'd eventually turn on me. Where are these records? Hidden in a storage unit in Riverside. Unit 347. The key is in my apartment, taped under the kitchen sink. This was new. The FBI had searched Derek's apartment but hadn't found any key. Chen made a note, and I saw agents leaving the courtroom, presumably to investigate. You claim Grace approached you, Chen continued, but we have evidence of you researching the Matthews family months before that charity gala. Derek smiled coldly. Of course I research them. I research every wealthy family in Los Angeles. It's my job, but I was planning to target Kara, not Grace. My blood chilled. Derek had been planning to seduce me. Grace figured that out, he continued. She said her daughter was too smart, too careful, but she herself was available and willing. Why work for the money when she'd freely give it? So you switched targets. I switched partners. Grace wasn't a victim, she was a collaborator. Check the storage unit. You'll find contracts we drew up, splitting territories and profits. We were building a murder-for-hire network using her widows' groups as recruitment grounds. The testimony continued for hours. Derek revealed details that painted an even darker picture than we'd imagined. Grace hadn't just killed for money, she'd killed for pleasure, for power, for the simple satisfaction of getting away with it. She kept trophies, Derek said. Jewelry from victims' photos taken at funerals, newspaper clippings. She had a scrapbook labeled Freedom Stories. Every death she'd caused presented like achievements. Where is this scrapbook? Hidden in her closet inside a hat box on the top shelf. At least it was 2 weeks ago when I last saw it. More agents left the courtroom. By now, search warrants were probably being executed across the city. Sterling asked his final question. Mr. Holbrook, do you regret your actions? I regret meeting Grace Matthews, Derek said, looking directly at her. I thought I was a master manipulator until I met the Queen. Everything I know about murder, I learned from her. Grace couldn't contain herself anymore. She shot to her feet, screaming, "Liar! You corrupted me! You destroyed my life!" Judge Weinstein banged her gavel. "Control your client, Mr. Bradshaw, or she'll be removed. Or most some dum-dum-dums, mos." You pathetic coward! Grace continued, ignoring her lawyer's attempts to silence her. Blaming a woman for your crimes. You killed them. You planned everything. I learned from the best, Derek shot back. Tell them about William Hendricks Grace, your first husband. Tell them how you practiced on him before perfecting the technique. Bailiff, remove the defendant, Judge Weinstein ordered. As guards dragged Grace out, still screaming, Derek smiled. It was the same cold smile I'd seen when he thought he was winning. Even facing life in prison, he'd found a way to destroy his enemy. The FBI agents who'd left earlier began returning carrying evidence boxes. The storage unit and hat box had yielded exactly what Derek promised. Chen requested a recess to review the new evidence. During the break, I found myself face to face with Derek in the courthouse hallway. Guards flanked him, but he stopped when he saw me. Kara, he said almost gently, I'm sorry about your father. If it helps, he never suffered. Grace made sure it was quick. Don't, I said coldly, don't pretend you have any humanity. Fair enough. He studied me. You know, if things had been different, we might have worked well together. You've got your mother's intelligence without her cruelty. I'm nothing like her. No, he agreed. You're not. That's why you won, he gestured to the guards. We're all going to prison, but you're free. In this game, that makes you the winner. As they led him away, I realized he was right in his twisted way. This had all been a game to them, chess played with human lives. But games require players who agree to the rules. Dad, Eleanor, all their victims had never agreed to play. They'd simply lived their lives until Grace and Derek decided they were pawns to be removed. When court reconvened, Chen presented the new evidence. The storage unit contained contracts, financial records, and correspondence outlining a massive criminal enterprise. Grace and Derek had been recruiting accomplices, teaching murder methods, and taking percentages of inheritance theft. They'd turned killing into a franchise operation. The hat box was even worse. Grace's Freedom Stories scrapbook contained photos of 23 victims each, with detailed notes about the poisoning method, duration of suffering, and financial gain. She'd rated each murder on difficulty and profitability, like a twisted Yelp review of death. The final blow came from Derek's last revelation. Among his hidden records was a recording from 3 months ago, Grace alone thinking Derek was in the shower making a phone call. Yes, it's me. Grace's voice filled the courtroom. Derek's becoming a liability. I need another solution, something that looks accidental. No, not poison this time. Maybe a boating accident. He can't swim despite all his yacht talk. She'd been planning to kill Derek. The student had been preparing to eliminate the teacher, just as she'd likely eliminated every partner before him. Derek's paranoia had saved his life and given us the evidence to destroy hers. As the day ended, Derek was led back to jail, his testimony complete. He'd burned everything down, including himself, rather than let Grace win. In his warped way, it was almost admirable. Mutual assured destruction, Eleanor murmured beside me. They deserved each other. Tomorrow would bring Grace's defense, though what defense could stand against such evidence? Her own partner had gutted her case, revealed every secret, exposed every crime. The woman who'd thought herself untouchable had been brought down by the man she'd chosen as an accomplice. Justice has a certain poetry. Grace had spent 20 years poisoning others. In the end, her own toxic relationship became the poison that destroyed her. Derek might be a confessed killer, but his testimony had done what we couldn't show the jury: exactly who Grace Matthews really was. A monster who kept scrapbooks of her murders. A teacher who turned killing into curriculum. A mother who could smile at her children while planning their deaths. Tomorrow she'd try to salvage something from the wreckage. But Derek had been thorough in his destruction. Every lie she might tell had been preemptively exposed, every excuse already shattered. The king and queen had fallen, turning on each other as their empire crumbled, and in the rubble of their mutual betrayal, justice finally had room to grow. Ryan took the witness stand with the weight of 28 years of manipulation visible on his shoulders. He lost weight during the trial preparation, his boyish features sharpened by stress and newfound sobriety. The gambling debts were paid, Eleanor had seen to that, but the emotional debts to our family remained. State your name for the record, Ada Chen began gently. She'd coached Ryan extensively, knowing his testimony could provide the emotional impact the jury needed to see beyond the clinical evidence of murder. Ryan Harold Matthews, he said, voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Ryan, what was your relationship with your mother like growing up? He took a breath, eyes finding mine in the gallery. I nodded encouragingly. Complicated, Ryan began. Mom played my sister and me against each other from the time we were small. If Kara got praise for grades, Mom would remind me I was the better athlete. If I won a baseball game, she'd point out that Kara never disappointed Dad the way I did. Can you give specific examples? When I was 10, I accidentally broke Mom's perfume bottle. She made me tell Dad it was Kara, said if I didn't, she'd tell him about the candy I'd stolen from the store, which she'd actually encouraged me to take. When Kara got grounded, Mom comforted her, playing the loving mother while knowing she'd orchestrated the whole thing. How did this affect your relationship with your sister? We were never allies, always competitors. I see now that's exactly what Mom wanted. Divided children can't compare notes about their mother's behavior. Chen guided him through years of examples, the calculated cruelties, the strategic affections, the way Grace had isolated each family member from the others. Then came the harder questions. When did you first realize something was wrong with your mother? Honestly, part of me always knew, Ryan admitted, but I was trained to excuse it. Mom would do something cruel, then buy me something expensive. She'd lie about someone, then take me on a special trip. I learned to accept the bad because the good felt so good. What about your father's death? Ryan's composure cracked. I was devastated. Dad was the stable one, the one who saw through Mom's games even if he couldn't stop them. When he died, I lost my anchor. Did you suspect your mother's involvement? No, not then. I was too deep in grief and addiction. I'd started gambling in college, but after Dad died, it spiraled. Mom knew and used it to control me. How? She'd give me money for debts, then remind me how ungrateful I was when I questioned her about anything. When Derek came along and I felt uncomfortable about how fast things moved, she threatened to cut me off. I needed the money, so I stayed quiet. Chen introduced Ryan's bank records, showing the pattern of Grace's financial manipulation. Payments always came just when Ryan was desperate, always with strings attached. Tell us about Derek's blackmail, Chen prompted. Ryan detailed the months of coercion, the photos with Jennifer Coleman, the threats to expose his affair and debts, the constant pressure to spy on me. His voice broke when describing the storage unit meeting. They wanted me to deliver Kara to them, my own sister. They had a syringe prepared. Derek showed it to me. Said it would be quick, that Kara wouldn't suffer. Like that made it okay. What did you do? I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed to flee, but then I thought about Dad, about what he'd want me to do. So I stayed, wore the wire, and gathered evidence. It was the first brave thing I'd done in years. Ryan, I need to ask about something sensitive. Did your mother ever discuss your father's death with you after Derek's arrest? Ryan closed his eyes. Yes. She called from jail using another inmate's phone time. She was manic, alternating between rage and manipulation. She said Dad had been planning to divorce her and take everything. Said he'd never loved either of us, that we were just obligations to him. Did you believe her? For about 10 seconds. Then I remembered every baseball game Dad attended, every driving lesson, every time he'd told us he loved us. Mom was rewriting history to justify murder. Did she say anything else? She admitted it, Ryan said quietly. Not directly, but she said Dad's death had solved so many problems, that we were better off without his judgment and principles. She actually asked if I was grateful for the freedom his death provided. The courtroom was silent, except for the scratch of the court reporter's keys. What did you tell her? That I'd rather have Dad poor than her rich. That's when she really lost it. Started screaming about ungrateful children, about everything she'd sacrificed. But the mask had slipped. I wasn't her son anymore. I was just another person who'd betrayed her. Bradshaw's cross-examination tried to paint Ryan as an unreliable witness, a gambling addict with reasons to lie. But Ryan owned his failures with a dignity that resonated. "Yes, I'm an addict," he said when pressed. "Yes, I lied and stole and disappointed everyone who loved me, but that doesn't change what I witnessed. If anything, my weakness made me the perfect tool for Mom's manipulation. She counted on my failures to keep me silent." "You claim your mother manipulated you, but weren't you simply making excuses for your behavior?" "For years, yes," Ryan admitted. "It was easier to blame Mom than face my own choices. But manipulation and personal responsibility aren't mutually exclusive. She created the environment, but I chose to gamble. She offered the money, but I chose to take it. The difference now is I'm choosing to tell the truth. Even though it benefits you to testify against her." "Well, what benefit?" Ryan asked genuinely. "My mother's a killer. My father's dead. My grandmother was poisoned for years. My sister nearly died stopping Mom's escape. I'm in therapy and recovery, facing the wreckage of my life. Where exactly is my benefit?" Chen redirected, asking Ryan to read from a letter he'd written to Dad's grave, part of his therapy process. His voice broke multiple times as he read. "Dad, I failed you in so many ways. You tried to teach me integrity, but I chose the easy path every time. You showed me love, but I let Mom convince me it was obligation. I see now what you were protecting us from, why you stayed despite knowing what she was. You put your children above your happiness. I put my addiction above everything. I'm trying to be better, to be the man you believed I could be. It's too late for your forgiveness, but maybe it's not too late for redemption." "Ryan," Chen asked gently, "what would you like this jury to know about Grace Matthews?" He looked directly at his mother for the first time. Grace stared back with cold fury, no maternal warmth remaining. "She's not insane or misguided or a victim," Ryan said clearly. "She's a person who chose murder as a solution to problems. She killed my father because he was inconvenient. She poisoned my grandmother for money. She planned to kill my sister to protect herself. And through it all, she felt justified. That's not mental illness, that's evil wearing a familiar face." "Thank you, Ryan. No further questions." As Ryan left the stand, he stopped by the gallery. Eleanor stood opening her arms, and Ryan fell into them like a child seeking comfort. They held each other, while Grace watched with undisguised contempt. The prosecution's next witness was Jennifer Coleman, Marcus's wife, with whom Ryan had the affair. She testified briefly about Derek's blackmail attempt, corroborating Ryan's account. Her marriage had survived the revelation, she said, because Marcus recognized she'd been as much a victim of manipulation as anyone. "Grace Matthews introduced us," Jennifer explained, "suggested I comfort Ryan after his father's death. Looking back, I think she was creating leverage for later use." The final witness of the day was Nancy, Eleanor's investigator-turned-caregiver. She presented years of surveillance, documented poisoning attempts, and Grace's pattern of visiting Eleanor precisely when her symptoms worsened. "Mrs. Matthews was methodical," Nancy testified. "She maintained detailed schedules, always had excuses for extra visits, and showed textbook behavior of a poisoner, excessive concern paired with subtle suggestions that Eleanor was naturally declining." But it was Nancy's final evidence that devastated Grace's defense. She'd managed to place a camera in Grace's car during the final weeks, capturing audio of Grace practicing her testimony. "I need to cry when I mention Harold," Grace's voice said on the recording, "but not too much. Juries hate hysterical women. Talk about Derek's control, his threats, maybe hint at sexual violence. No too far. Physical intimidation is enough. Remember, I'm the victim here. I've always been the victim." The recording continued with Grace rehearsing different versions of events, trying on emotions like costumes, calculating which presentation would generate the most sympathy. She'd even practiced fainting, timing it for maximum impact during her planned testimony. As court adjourned, I watched bailiffs lead Grace away. She'd sat through her son's betrayal as she saw it with increasing rage. The careful mask she'd worn throughout the trial had finally cracked completely. The jury had seen the real Grace Matthews, and no amount of performed tears could wash away that image. Ryan waited for me outside the courthouse. He looked exhausted, but somehow lighter, as if confession had physically lifted weight from him. "How do you feel, Dant?" I asked. "Empty," he said after a moment. "But it's a good empty, like cleaning out an infected wound. It hurts, but it's necessary." "You did good today. Dad would be proud." Ryan's eyes filled with tears. "Think so." "I know so. You faced the truth and told it despite the cost. That's what Dad always wanted for us, to choose integrity, even when it hurt." We stood there as the Los Angeles sun set, two siblings finally united in truth after years of manufactured division. Grace had created us as weapons against each other. In the end, we'd become allies against her. "What happens now?" Ryan asked. "Now we heal," I said. "We rebuild. We become the family Dad always believed we could be." "Without her," Ryan added. "Without her," I agreed. Tomorrow would bring closing arguments, then jury deliberation. But whatever the verdict, Ryan had already won his most important battle. He'd chosen truth over comfort, family over fear, redemption over continued decay. Grace had lost more than her freedom. She'd lost her power over us. And for a woman who'd spent decades controlling others through manipulation and murder, that might be the greatest punishment of all. The prosecution's closing argument was scheduled for 9 a.m., but by 8:30, the courthouse steps were packed with media and spectators. The Grace Matthews trial had become a national sensation, a Black Widow story with enough twists to fuel a dozen true crime podcasts. Inside, I sat with Eleanor and Ryan, our family unit reformed through tragedy. ADA Monica Chen stood before the jury, her presence commanding despite her petite stature. For 3 weeks, she'd built a case that revealed Grace not just as a killer, but as the architect of a murder empire. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Chen began, "you've heard testimony about poison, about greed, about betrayal. But this case is fundamentally about power, the power Grace Matthews wielded over life and death for 23 people." She clicked through slides showing each victim's face. 23 photographs filled the screen. Men and women, young and old, all connected by one thread. They'd stood between Grace and something she wanted. Harold Matthews died because he wanted a divorce. William Hendricks died because Grace wanted his estate. Patricia Coleman died because she questioned charity finances. Each death was calculated, documented, and celebrated in the defendant's own hand. Chen displayed pages from Grace's poison diary, her Freedom Stories scrapbook, the contracts with Derek for their murder-for-hire network. The evidence was overwhelming, but Chen knew conviction required more than facts. It required the jury to see Grace as she truly was. "The defense will tell you Grace Matthews was manipulated by Derek Callahan. They'll paint her as a victim, but victims don't keep 20-year records of their murders. Victims don't teach classes on poisoning. Victims don't plan to kill their own daughters when threatened with exposure." She played audio clips, Grace planning my murder, laughing about Dad's death, discussing Eleanor's poisoning like a science experiment. Each recording stripped away another layer of the facade Grace had worn for decades. This woman sat at family dinners while poison coursed through her victims' veins. She comforted grieving relatives at funerals for deaths she caused. She accepted condolences with satisfaction, knowing she'd freed herself through murder. Chen's voice rose with controlled passion. Grace Matthews didn't snap. She didn't act in passion. For over 2 decades, she turned murder into a profession, poison into a tool of finance. She corrupted others, teaching them to kill, building a network of death that would have continued if not for the courage of her own daughter. She gestured to me in the gallery. Kara Matthews lost her father to her mother's greed. She nearly lost her grandmother, her brother, her own life. Yet she fought for justice, not revenge. She could have confronted her mother privately, could have negotiated, could have chosen silence. Instead, she chose truth. Objection, Bradshaw called. Counsel is making improper arguments about non-defendant persons. Sustained. Stay focused on the evidence, Ms. Chen. Chen nodded smoothly, continuing. The evidence shows deliberation, premeditation, and a complete absence of remorse. Grace Matthews kept trophies of her kills. She rated murders by profitability. She viewed human life as an obstacle to wealth. That is not manipulation, that is evil. The closing continued for 2 hours, Chen methodically destroying every possible defense. Mental illness. The psychiatric evaluation showed Grace was completely sane. Coercion. She'd been killing long before meeting Derek. Self-defense. Her victims had trusted her completely. You have the power to stop her, Chen concluded. 23 people couldn't. They died believing they were safe with someone who claimed to love them. Don't let Grace Matthews fool another jury the way she fooled her victims. Find her guilty on all counts. Bradshaw's closing was a masterpiece of deflection. He painted Grace as a battered woman, psychologically tortured by Derek, driven to extremes by fear. He challenged evidence and authenticity, suggested conspiracy, threw doubt wherever possible. Grace Matthews is a mother, a grandmother, a pillar of her community, Bradshaw argued. Are we to believe this woman suddenly became a serial killer? Or is it more likely she fell under the influence of a professional con man who specialized in destroying women? He attacked Derek's credibility. Ryan's addiction history even suggested I'd fabricated that evidence out of grief-driven delusion. It was desperate but skillfully delivered. For a moment, I worried it might work. Then Judge Weinstein made an unexpected decision. Before jury instructions, I'll hear the motion regarding newly discovered evidence. Chen stood. Your Honor, the defense has just provided notice of a witness who claims to have information vital to Mrs. Matthews's defense. Given the lateness, we object. I'll hear the proffer, the judge decided. Mr. Bradshaw. The witness is Dr. Martin Jeffries, Mrs. Matthews's psychiatrist from 15 years ago. He has records suggesting long-term domestic abuse that could explain her subsequent actions. My blood froze. 15 years ago was when Grandpa died, when Grace's poisoning of Eleanor began. What lies had she told this psychiatrist? Bring him in, Judge Weinstein ordered. Dr. Jeffries was elderly, carrying a box of files. He took the stand nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. Bradshaw guided him through his credentials, then asked about Grace. I treated Mrs. Matthews for severe depression and PTSD, Dr. Jeffries testified. She exhibited classic symptoms of long-term abuse. What kind of abuse? Psychological, primarily. She described a home life dominated by control, manipulation, and threats. Her husband, Harold, allegedly monitored her. Every move isolated her from friends and threatened to take her children if she left. I wanted to scream. Dad had been the kindest, gentlest man I'd ever known. But Grace had been planting these lies, even then, creating a paper trail for future use. Chen cross-examined carefully. Dr. Jeffries, did you ever meet Harold Matthews? No, I only knew what Mrs. Matthews told me. Did she ever show physical evidence of abuse, bruises, injuries? No, but psychological abuse often leaves no visible marks. Did you verify any of her claims independently? That wasn't my role. I was treating her reported symptoms. Chen introduced evidence that during the time Grace claimed to be isolated and controlled, she'd actually been serving on 3 charity boards, traveling frequently, and maintaining active social relationships. Dr. Jeffries looked increasingly uncomfortable. One more question, Doctor. Did Mrs. Matthews ever discuss her first husband with you? Briefly, she mentioned he'd died in an accident. Did she tell you she'd been investigated for his murder? Bradshaw objected furiously, but Chen had made her point. Dr. Jeffries left the stand, looking shaken, his testimony more harmful than helpful to Grace's defense. But Bradshaw had one more card to play. The defense calls Grace Matthews. The courtroom stirred as Grace rose. She dressed carefully, a modest gray dress, minimal makeup, hair pulled back simply. She looked vulnerable, almost grandmotherly. It was a masterful performance before she'd even spoken. Mrs. Matthews, Bradshaw began gently, I know this is difficult, but please tell the jury about your marriage to Harold. Grace dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Harold was a good provider, but he was controlling. Everything had to be his way. He chose my clothes, my friends, even what I could eat. If I disagreed, he'd give me the silent treatment for days. Was there physical abuse? Once, Grace said quietly. When I suggested getting a job, he grabbed my wrist so hard it left bruises. He said no wife of his would work, that I should be grateful for what he provided. Lies. All lies. I remembered Mom working at the literacy center, choosing her own designer wardrobe, traveling with friends. But Grace sold it beautifully, tears falling at precisely the right moments. How did you meet Derek Callahan? He seemed so kind, Grace continued. After Harold died, I was lost. Derek offered to help with finances, then gradually became more. I was vulnerable, and he exploited that. Did he threaten you? Constantly. He said if I didn't help him, he'd hurt my children. He showed me pictures of other women who'd refused him. They'd all died mysteriously. I was terrified. She painted a picture of a woman trapped between grief and fear, forced into crimes she never would have chosen. It was compelling fiction, delivered with Oscar-worthy skill. Chen's cross-examination was brutal. Mrs. Matthews, you testified Derek threatened your children, yet you planned to murder your daughter. How do you reconcile that? I never planned, that's Derek's lie. I'm showing you State's Exhibit 93. Is this your handwriting? Chen displayed a note. Kara becoming too suspicious. May need permanent solution. Research making suicide believable. Derek made me write that, Grace said desperately. Under duress? Yes. Then why is it in your poisoned diary from 5 years before you met him? Grace's mask slipped for just a moment before she recovered. That must be misdated. The ink dating analysis confirms it's 5 years old. Were you lying then or now? I don't recall. Chen systematically destroyed Grace's testimony. For every claim of abuse, she produced evidence of freedom. For every tear, she showed calculations from Grace's own records. The performance crumbled under facts. You claim Harold was controlling, yet you had your own bank accounts, credit cards, and investment portfolio. How do you explain that? He monitored everything. Here are the account records, no evidence of monitoring. In fact, you made large withdrawals Harold never questioned, including $50,000 the week before he died. What was that for? Grace's composure cracked. I don't remember every transaction from years ago. Perhaps this will refresh your memory. Chen showed a receipt. $50,000 transferred to an account in the Caymans, the same account Derek Callahan would later use. You knew him before your husband's death, didn't you? No, that's impossible. Like it's impossible you poisoned Eleanor Matthews for 15 years. Like it's impossible you killed 23 people. Objection, Bradshaw shouted. Badgering. Sustained. Move on, Ms. Chen. But the damage was done. Grace's careful victim persona had shattered. The jury saw her rage, her calculation, her complete lack of genuine emotion except when cornered. Chen's final question was devastating. Mrs. Matthews, your son testified you laughed about your husband's death. Your response? Grace turned to Ryan with pure venom. My son is an addict who would say anything for money, just like his father, weak and disappointing. The courtroom gasped. Even Bradshaw winced. In one sentence, Grace had revealed her true nature, a mother who could dismiss her child with cruel precision. No further questions, Chen said quietly. As Grace left the stand, she tried to recapture her victim persona, but it was too late. The jury had seen behind the mask. They'd witnessed the real Grace Matthews, calculating, cruel, and utterly without remorse. During the break, Bradshaw approached Chen with a plea offer: life without parole if Grace would reveal the full network name, all accomplices detail every murder. Chen didn't hesitate. No deals. Your client faces justice for every life she took. The jury instructions were standard, but weighty. 23 counts of murder, multiple counts of attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, elder abuse. If convicted on all counts, Grace would face multiple life sentences. As the jury filed out to deliberate, I caught Grace's eye one last time. She stared at me with undisguised hatred, her mask completely gone. This was the woman who'd raised me, a killer who'd worn the disguise of motherhood for decades. "How long do you think they'll deliberate?" Ryan asked. "Not long," Eleanor said firmly. "Evil that obvious doesn't require much discussion." She was right. 4 hours later, the jury returned. As the foreman stood to read the verdicts, Grace sat rigid, still believing somehow she'd escape consequences. On count 1, murder in the first degree of Harold Matthews, we find the defendant guilty. On count 2, murder in the first degree of William Hendricks, we find the defendant guilty. On and on it went 23 times. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Grace didn't cry or collapse. She sat perfectly still, the reality finally sinking in. She'd lost. Despite all her planning, all her manipulation, all her murders, she'd lost. As court officers prepared to lead her away, she turned to me one final time. "I should have started with you," she said coldly. "Yes," I replied, "you should have." They led her away to begin multiple life sentences. She'd die in prison, as alone as she'd made her victims in their final moments. It was justice, even if it couldn't bring back the dead. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, but I pushed through them, silently focused on the 2 people who mattered, Eleanor and Ryan. We'd survived Grace Matthews. We'd found justice for Dad and all her victims. Now finally, we could begin to heal. The penalty phase began 2 days after the guilty verdicts. California had abolished the death penalty, but Grace still faced the formal sentencing that would determine if she'd ever have the possibility of parole. The families of her victims had traveled from across the country to deliver impact statements, turning the courtroom into a gallery of grief. I sat between Eleanor and Ryan. As prosecutor, Chen called the first speaker Maria Hendricks, sister of Grace's first murdered husband. William was 26 when he married Grace. Maria began, her voice shaking. "He was brilliant, kind, just starting his career as a professor. We were so happy he'd found love. I was her bridesmaid. I helped her pick the flowers for their wedding." Maria's composure cracked. "She sent me a sympathy card after she killed him, cried on my shoulder at his funeral. For 25 years, I believed my brother drove off that cliff by accident. Now I know she pushed him over, metaphorically and literally." One by one, they came forward. Children orphaned by Grace's schemes, siblings who'd spent decades wondering why their loved ones died so suddenly. Eleanor had contacted them, all helping coordinate their presence, ensuring every victim had a voice. "My mother was Patricia Coleman," a young man testified. "Grace poisoned her because Mom questioned missing charity funds. I was 12. My sister was 9. We grew up without a mother because Grace Matthews wanted to steal from sick children." The testimony continued for hours. Each statement painted a picture of lives destroyed, families shattered, futures stolen. Grace sat unmoved through it, all occasionally whispering to Bradshaw, but showing no emotion as her victims' loved ones wept. Then came our turn. Eleanor went first, using her cane but standing proud. "Your Honor," Eleanor began, "Grace Matthews poisoned me for 15 years. Small doses, careful amounts designed to make me appear senile. She wanted my money, but more than that, she wanted power. the power to decide if I lived or died, if I was lucid or confused. Eleanor's voice strengthened. But I survived. I documented every poisoning, every symptom, every cruel smile as she handed me tea. Grace thought age made me weak. Instead, it made me patient. Patient enough to gather evidence, to wait for justice, to ensure she could never harm another soul. Grace took my son. Eleanor continued, her voice breaking for the first time. Harold was a good man, a loving father, a devoted son. He died believing his wife loved him. That betrayal, that violation of trust, is almost worse than the murder itself. Grace Matthews doesn't just kill bodies, she kills faith in human kindness. Ryan spoke next, his recovery evident in his steady voice. Grace Matthews was my mother, but she was never maternal. She used my weaknesses against me, fostered my addiction, and tried to turn me into an accomplice to murder. Every childhood memory is now tainted, wondering which moments were genuine and which were manipulation. He looked directly at Grace. You killed Dad, but you also killed the idea of family for me. Every relationship I have is shadowed by the question, are they using me? Are they planning something? That's your true legacy? Not the money you stole or the people you killed, but the inability to trust that you planted in your own children. But I'm healing, Ryan added, with help, with therapy, with the love of the family you tried to destroy. Kara and Grandma Eleanor have shown me what real family means. So while you rot in prison, we'll be living, truly living, not just surviving like we did under your shadow. Finally, it was my turn. I'd prepared remarks, but standing there facing the woman who'd given me life and tried to take it, the prepared speech felt inadequate. Your Honor, I began, I'm not here as Grace Matthews' daughter. That relationship died when she murdered my father. I'm here as Harold Matthews' daughter, as Eleanor Matthews' granddaughter, as Ryan Matthews' sister. I'm here for the family Grace tried to destroy. I turned to Grace. You taught me to tie my shoes, to brush my teeth, to say please and thank you. Basic human behaviors that you mimicked, but never felt. You performed motherhood like an actress, hitting your mark, saying your lines, but never understanding the role. The irony is you created your own downfall. By poisoning Eleanor slowly, you gave her time to investigate. By involving Derek, you brought in someone equally treacherous who kept evidence against you. By trying to frame me, you triggered my professional instincts. Every crime you committed planted the seeds of its own discovery. Azza, you asked me once if I was grateful for the freedom Dad's death provided. Here's my answer. I'm grateful he lived long enough to teach me real love. I'm grateful Eleanor survived to show me strength. I'm grateful Ryan found courage to choose family over fear. I'm grateful for the 26 years I had with my father, even though you stole the 40 more we should have shared. My voice hardened. But I'm most grateful that you failed. You killed 23 people, but you didn't destroy their legacy. Their families survive, their memories persist, and their justice is being served. You're not a master criminal. You're a footnote in their stories, the villain defeated by your own arrogance. Judge Weinstein listened to every statement with careful attention. When the last victim's family member finished speaking, she called for a recess before delivering the sentence. During the break, I noticed someone new in the gallery, Detective Martinez, who'd posed as the notary during the beach house sting. She approached with an envelope. Thought you should see this, she said quietly. We found it hidden in Grace's cell. She must have written it before the verdict. The letter was addressed to me, written in Grace's perfect penmanship. Kara, by the time you read this, I'll have been wrongfully convicted by a jury poisoned against me by your lies. You always were too much like your father, self-righteous, judgmental, unable to see the bigger picture. You think you've won, but consider this. Everything you have came from my efforts. The house you live in, the education you received, the opportunities you enjoyed, all paid for by my actions. You've benefited from every death, every poison, every crime. You're as guilty as I am, just too hypocritical to admit it. Your father was leaving us. Did you know that he had divorce papers drawn up, was planning to abandon you and Ryan for his secretary? I saved you from that humiliation. I saved our family's reputation, and this is how you repay me. I hope you enjoy your victory, knowing it's built on blood. Every success you achieve will be tainted by the knowledge that you exist because of my crimes. I gave you life twice, once at birth and again when I removed the father who would have abandoned you. You're not Harold's daughter, you're mine, and someday you'll understand that we're exactly alike. Your mother, despite your denials. I crumpled the letter, my hands shaking with rage. Even now, even facing life in prison, she was trying to manipulate, to plant seeds of doubt, to claim credit for my existence while denying my father's love. Don't let her poison you, too, Eleanor said softly, reading over my shoulder. Her words are as toxic as her tea. Truth is the only antidote. When court reconvened, Judge Weinstein delivered a sentence that reflected the full horror of Grace's crimes. Grace Matthews, she began, you've been convicted of 23 counts of first-degree murder, 4 counts of attempted murder, and numerous related charges. The evidence shows a pattern of calculated evil spanning decades. You violated the most sacred trusts between spouses, between parent and child, between caregiver and vulnerable elder. You've shown no remorse, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no capacity for redemption. You used your intelligence and social position to prey on those who loved you. You turned murder into a business model and tried to franchise death. Therefore, this court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole for each murder count to be served consecutively. Additionally, you receive 25 years for each attempted murder, also consecutive. You will never leave prison. You will die behind bars alone as your victims died, but unlike them, you'll have decades to contemplate your crimes. Grace finally reacted, shooting to her feet. You can't do this. I'm a mother, a grandmother. I have rights. You had rights, Judge Weinstein replied coldly. You forfeited them when you chose murder. Bailiff removed the defendant. As they dragged Grace out, she screamed my name, begging me to help her, alternating between threats and pleas. But I felt nothing except relief. The woman who terrorized our family for decades was finally powerless. Outside the courthouse, the media circus waited, but so did something else, families of Grace's victims standing together. Maria Hendricks approached me first. Thank you, she said simply, for fighting her, for exposing her, for giving us closure. One by one, they thanked us. We stood there, 24 survivors of Grace Matthews' cruelty, bonded by tragedy, but not defined by it. Someone suggested a photo, and we gathered on the courthouse steps. The image would later go viral, the families Grace tried to destroy, standing together in victory. That night, we held a memorial at the beach house, my beach house saved by Eleanor's foresight. We lit candles for each victim, said their names, shared their stories. Dad's candle burned brightest in my eyes, but they all mattered. Each life Grace stole had been precious to someone. To Harold Matthews, Eleanor toasted as the sun set over the Pacific, who loved his family more than life itself. To William Hendricks, Maria added, who never got to finish his first semester of teaching. Name by name, we remembered them. When we finished, 23 candles flickered in the ocean breeze lights Grace had tried to extinguish, but which burned on in memory. Ryan stood beside me, 6 months sober and getting stronger every day. Think we'll ever be normal, he asked. We were never normal, I replied. We just didn't know how abnormal until the mask came off, but we get to decide what comes next. Grace doesn't get a vote anymore. Eleanor, exhausted but triumphant, squeezed both our hands. Your father would be so proud. You faced evil and chose justice. You broke the cycle of poison and lies. That's the real verdict, not what happened in court, but what happens next. As the candles burned down and the families slowly departed, I thought about Grace's letter. She was wrong about everything. but especially about one thing: I wasn't her daughter in any way that mattered. I was Harold Matthews' daughter, raised on truth and love, even if poison ran beneath the surface. And unlike Grace, I'd chosen to be an antidote rather than a toxin. That was the real justice, not just that she'd been stopped, but that she'd failed to corrupt what she'd tried to destroy. We'd survived her worst and emerged not as victims, but as victors. The war was over. The healing could finally begin. 6 months after the verdict, I stood in my legitimate beach house, the one Eleanor had secretly saved from Grace's final attempt at cruelty. The morning sun painted the Pacific in shades of gold and turquoise, a view Dad had loved and preserved for me even in death. Today marked the grand opening of Matthews Financial Justice, my new forensic accounting firm, specializing in family fraud cases. Ryan appeared in the doorway carrying a box of champagne glasses. 6 months of sobriety had restored the brother I remembered from childhood before Grace's manipulations divided us. He'd completed his accounting degree and joined the firm as a partner, turning his intimate knowledge of financial deception into a force for justice. "Eleanor's here," he announced, "and she's brought half of Los Angeles." I laughed. Of course she has. The beach house's main room had been transformed into a reception space. Where Grace had once planned murders over tea, we now celebrated new beginnings. Eleanor held court near the windows, regaling guests with stories that no longer required careful editing to hide family secrets. Kara. Sarah Martinez, my old college roommate whose property Grace had mistakenly tried to sell, waved from across the room. "This place looks amazing." Sarah had become more than a friend. Through the trial, she'd become my business advisor and closest confidant. When the media attention became overwhelming, she'd sheltered me. When the nightmares came, she'd listened. Now, she stood beside me as I built something positive from the ashes of betrayal. Agent Thompson arrived with his wife, looking relaxed in civilian clothes. "Congratulations, Matthews. Heard you've already got 3 cases lined up." 4, I corrected. Apparently, our story inspired other families to look closer at suspicious deaths. Turns out Grace and Derek weren't the only predators hunting in wealthy circles. The reception filled with an unlikely mix: FBI agents, fraud investigators, families we'd helped, and survivors of Grace's network. Some had lost loved ones to poison, others to financial manipulation, but all had found their way to justice through our shared experiences. Nancy Chen, Eleanor's investigator-turned-friend, pulled me aside. "There's someone here you should meet," she said, guiding me to a quiet corner where a nervous-looking woman waited. "This is Jennifer Walsh," Nancy introduced. "She thinks her mother is being poisoned by her stepfather." I studied Jennifer, mid-30s designer clothes that didn't quite hide the fear in her eyes. 6 months ago, I might have dismissed her concerns as paranoia. Now, I knew better. "Tell me everything," I said, leading her to my office. An hour later, I'd heard a familiar story. Mysterious illness changed Will's isolation from family. Jennifer's stepfather had appeared 2 years after her father's death, charming and attentive, slowly taking control of her mother's life. "Everyone thinks I'm jealous," Jennifer said tearfully, "that I can't accept Mom moving on. But something's wrong. She's forgotten my birthday twice, can't remember conversations, seems confused about basic things. Has she seen doctors?" "He takes her, always insists on being in the room. The doctors say it's early dementia, but Mom's only 62. There's no family history." I thought of Eleanor, poisoned for 15 years while everyone attributed her symptoms to age. "We'll help," I promised. "First, we need documentation. Financial records, medical history, anything suspicious. Ryan's excellent at tracing hidden assets." Jennifer's relief was palpable. "You believe me?" "I believe patterns," I said. "And what you're describing fits a pattern I know too well. The question isn't whether something's wrong, it's how deep the rot goes." As Jennifer left with Ryan to begin documenting evidence, I returned to the reception. The party continued, but I noticed Eleanor sitting alone on the deck, watching the waves. Tired? I asked, joining her. The thoughtful, she corrected. I was remembering the last time I stood on this deck. Your father was grilling you, and Ryan were arguing about volleyball rules, and Grace was mixing drinks. It seemed so perfect. It was perfect, I said. The poison underneath doesn't negate the love on top. Dad's happiness was real, even if Grace's was performance. Eleanor smiled. You've grown wise, dear one. Trauma does that, forces wisdom whether we want it or not. Speaking of wisdom, I said, I've been thinking about the foundation you mentioned for fraud victims. The Harold Matthews Foundation, Eleanor said promptly. I've already filed the paperwork. We'll provide resources for families investigating suspicious deaths, fund independent toxicology tests, offer legal support. Your father protected people through honest construction, now will protect them from dishonest destruction. Mark Thompson approached champagne in hand. Sorry to interrupt, but thought you should know Derek Callahan was killed in prison yesterday. Apparently, he tried to run a con on the wrong inmate. I felt nothing, no satisfaction, no sorrow, just acknowledgement. Derek had lived by manipulation and died by it. There was poetic justice in that, even if poetry had never been his strong suit. And Grace, Eleanor asked. Solitary confinement by her own request, Thompson replied. Seems the other inmates weren't impressed by a mother who killed for money. She'll serve her sentences alone, which might be the worst punishment for someone who lived for control over others. As the sun began to set, guests gradually departed. Ryan and Jennifer returned with preliminary findings, suspicious joint accounts, recently updated insurance policies, classic red flags, another family about to be saved from Grace's legacy of poison. Finally, only family remained, Eleanor, Ryan, Sarah, and me. We sat on the deck, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of justice and redemption. Dad would have loved this, Ryan said quietly. Us working together, helping people, building something good from something terrible. He's here, Eleanor said firmly. In the choices you make, the values you uphold, the love you share. Grace killed his body, but not his influence. Every family you save honors his memory. Sarah raised her glass. To Harold Matthews, who raised children strong enough to defeat the monster in their own home. To Eleanor Matthews, I added, who played the long game and won. We drank as the last light faded from the sky. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new challenges, new battles against those who poisoned trust and murdered love. But tonight, in the beach house Dad had saved for moments like this, we were simply family scarred but not broken, tested but not defeated. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Walsh. Thank you for believing me. For the first time in months, I have hope. I thought about Grace alone in her cell, surrounded by the ghosts of 23 victims. She'd spent decades taking hope from others, creating despair for profit. Now we were reversing her work one family at a time. Ready for this? Ryan asked, gesturing at the business cards reading Matthews Financial Justice stacked on the table. We were born ready, I replied. We just didn't know it until tested. Eleanor stood steadier than she'd been in years without poison coursing through her system. Then let's begin. There are families out there suffering in silence, victims who don't yet know they're victims. Time to shine light into the shadows where predators hide. As we closed up the beach house, I noticed something new on the mantle, a photo from the courthouse steps showing all the families Grace had tried to destroy standing together in victory. But next to it sat an older photo dad at his last birthday, laughing at something Ryan had said, while Eleanor cut cake and I took the picture. Even Grace was there, smiling her false smile, unaware that her own daughter would one day expose her truth. Both photos mattered. The first showed where we'd been a family harboring a killer love mixed with poison. The second showed where we were survivors, united by truth, building justice from injustice. The journey between them had nearly destroyed us, but we'd emerged stronger for the breaking. "Oh, lock up when you're done," Eleanor called. "Early meeting tomorrow with the district attorney. Seems they found 6 more suspicious deaths that match Grace's pattern. Our work's just beginning." After everyone left, I stood alone in the beach house, remembering Dad's voice. "The truth always surfaces, Kara. Sometimes it takes time, sometimes it takes courage, but truth is like the tide, inevitable." He'd been right. Truth had surfaced, washing away 20 years of lies. And now, like the tide, we'd keep returning wave after wave of justice for families like ours who'd suffered betrayal disguised as love. I locked the door and headed home, ready for tomorrow's battles. Grace had taught me that monsters wore familiar faces, but Dad had taught me something more powerful. Courage was just love refusing to surrender to fear. The war against Grace was over. The mission to prevent future Graces had just begun. And somewhere in the California night, I hoped Dad was watching, finally at peace, knowing his daughter had transformed poison into purpose, betrayal into justice, and a shattered family into an unbreakable force for good. Dear viewers, have you ever discovered a shocking truth about someone you trusted completely? How did you find the strength to seek justice while rebuilding your life? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else facing similar betrayal. If this story touched your heart or reminded you that truth always finds a way, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of courage and redemption. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone in their fight for justice. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. And remember, you have the strength to transform your deepest wounds into your greatest purpose. Stay strong, seek truth, and never forget the love that matters most will always stand with you against any darkness.